When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head.
She was covered in blood. It was a shocking sight.
She'd been battered to death. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary.
The house had been ransacked.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
A lot of people are scared living around here.
You just can't believe that it's happened.
The big fear is that our community is then under threat.
In the heart of the East Midlands lies historic Lincoln.
It's just got a wonderful, timeless feeling to it, Lincoln. We are a place of great historical interest. We've got everything, castles, cathedrals. There's a great many medieval churches, and there's a great waterway in the centre as well, the Brayford, established by the Romans. So we are a good tourist destination. And people like the fact we're not overly commercialised. We just think it's a wonderful, vibrant place.
And in recent years, Lincoln has become increasingly popular with overseas students.
The university, which is a huge university and, well, pretty much world famous, they've got colleges as well. Well, there are a lot of students, and a lot of the students are foreign nationals, many from the East Asian area. There is a nice mix.
To the south of Lincoln, on the River Witham, lies the suburb of Sincil Bank.
Sincil Bank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, being adopted by the students and working-class Lincoln folk. A stone's throw away from the football ground. It does have a very villagey feel. You will see children playing football in the street.
The Sincil Bank community is very diverse. I've been a resident my whole life, and we have a lot of people that are from different ethnic backgrounds. And because we're so close to the university and stuff, we do get a lot of uni students coming to live down here, especially now that the university's getting more popular. We also have a lot of elderly people, but we always try and find a way to build that community together. It's more like a village. People are always supportive of each other.
It's just a nice, friendly place. Everybody knows everybody on the street and everybody chats with everybody. All the kids play out together. It's got a proper community vibe.
It's very close to the South Common, which is the major green area in the south of Lincoln.
You know, there's a lovely park there where people go and walk their dogs and can go and sit. So you have got the nice, idyllic, peaceful park only a short distance away.
But the peace is shattered on one summer's day. At 12:20 p.m, police are called to an address in Sincil Bank.
When police arrived at the scene, they found a body of a woman that had been badly beaten. She had appeared to have been beaten with a blunt object.
The crime scene is secured.
The police came, they cornered off the streets, they weren't allowed anywhere near your houses and stuff. No one really told us what happened.
A murder investigation is immediately launched, and it's not long before the body is identified as 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang. But who is Mingzi, and how had she become a victim of such a brutal murder?
Mingzi Yang was originally from China. She came to the UK in 2008, and she was studying English at Lincoln College. Initially, she lived in the Humberside area, and in 2012, she moved to the address in Sincil Bank, where she lived with her partner, who she'd met fairly recently, Darren Grundy, and her young 5-year-old son.
Mingzi's son was from a previous relationship, but Darren quickly became part of the family.
As a couple, they were engaged to be married and were due to get married the following year.
But on the 17th of June, Darren had grown increasingly worried throughout the day when Mingzi failed to answer her phone.
He'd gone to work and he'd been trying to get hold of her throughout the day and without any success. So he left work early and made his way to the address.
Darren arrives home and makes a shocking discovery.
He found a scene of devastation, really. It looked like it had been ransacked. It looked like there'd maybe been a burglary. There was a lot of blood in the address, and he discovered Minxie's body.
And then he raised the alarm and the police were contacted.
As the police begin their investigation, they need to establish what Mingxie's last known movements were on the day of her murder.
Detectives will use a phrase sometimes that says if you find out how a person lived, then you'll find out how they died. It's about building up a detailed picture of that victim, because somewhere in there might just be the answer as to why this has happened and who's committed it. On the morning of the 17th of June, she'd gone and took her young son to the local primary school, which was a very short walk away, and returned to the address.
The killing was believed to have taken place in broad daylight, early in the morning after school, although the body wasn't discovered until Mr. Grundy raised the alarm.
The question is, who could possibly have wanted to harm Mingxie?
First thing that would go through my head is to try and establish exactly what has gone on.
The initial mystery for the police was that the house had been ransacked. There had been a burglary, and that possibly an intruder had killed Mingxie Yang.
News that a possible burglary has turned into a murder sends shockwaves across the local community.
There was fear and a sense of shock, because it's not something that happens with frequency in Lincoln at all. And the big fear is that our community is then under threat.
I remember hearing about it. My mum and my dad told me about it, and it was very upsetting. It's very traumatic knowing that it was basically on your front door. You know, you could go to sleep at night and something bad could happen. This could have been my mum, or this could have been my sister, or this could have been a relative that lived across the road.
Everybody was massively scared of what had happened because it was so close to home. It's 2 minutes away from the pub that I run. So that day, customers were coming in absolutely shocked and stunned with all the police cordons. It just is unheard of around here. You just can't believe that it's happened.
There was a genuine fear from people who lived in the local area that a burglar or intruder was at large and had carried out such a devastating crime in broad daylight. Neighbours were obviously concerned that this could possibly happen to them.
In the Lincoln suburb of Sincil-Bank, the community is shocked to hear of the murder of 29-year-old mum, Mingxie Yang, who has been beaten to death in her own home in what looks like a robbery gone wrong.
She was a local student. She'd got a child. We just couldn't believe that somebody like her had been killed.
And the fear on the streets is growing.
A lot of people were scared of living around here, knowing that something really bad's happened, and it's on your front door.
The first feeling is one of shock, and then wanting to know really what had happened. Was the public at risk?
When something like this happens in the community, there's a massive impact. There's lots of children and families in this area, so to have something so tragic and awful happening on your doorstep, it strikes fear throughout everybody.
That's all we were talking about. Everybody was just in utter disbelief that something like that could happen so close to home.
And a lot of them will have been friendly with Minxie Yang in any event, so apart from the personal impact, you really do get a build-up of tension throughout the community. People feel understandably frightened. Who's committed it? Why have they committed it? Are they going to come back and do it again? If it is a burglary, is our house going to be the next target?
With such a brutal murder happening on a busy street, police are taken aback at the boldness of the crime.
Mingxie had a young son who had been dropped off at school, and the killing was believed to have taken place sometime between about 9 and 10 a.m.
The fact that this has happened in broad daylight, at a time when people are taking their children to school, in a place like this, which appears quite peaceful and tranquil, is actually quite shocking.
The idea that an intruder had managed to get into this house unnoticed and carry out this killing was obviously very frightening for local people.
With the attack suspected to have occurred early in the day, police reach out to the locals for any potential information that may lead them to Mingzi's attacker.
You're really looking for witnesses. Something that's happened like that with so many injuries and so much devastation within the house would presumably have made some noise. You know, had she been screaming and shouting for help? Have the neighbours heard or seen anything?
In a case like this, in an area like this, the community are absolutely vital. They are the eyes and ears, and they're going to know things and see things that the police will never get to find out about. So it's really important to get out in amongst the community and make yourself visible and ask those important questions, because just by being here, you may be approached by a member of the public who tells you something that in isolation might seem quite minor, but actually, when you put it together as part of a jigsaw puzzle, it could actually help to solve the case.
Local reporter Richard Van Plu is also on the scene.
The first time I became aware of Mingzi's death was when the police put out a press release saying that the body of a woman had been found. Killings like this, obviously in rural areas, don't happen every day, and people are quite rightly shocked. And sometimes when you arrive at the scene, people will talk to you. It's their way of dealing with what's happened.
But so far, door-to-door inquiries have uncovered no leads to Mingzi's attacker. With the fear in the area growing, forensics arrived to examine the scene.
When I arrived at the scene, it was a shocking sight. Mingzi was face upwards and she was covered in blood. She was in the main living room. There was large, pooled, smeared blood staining on the carpet all around Mingzi's body. There was a white radiator near where Mingzi's body was found, and there was spots of blood spattered onto the white radiator. The smears and pools of blood along the carpet had indicated to me that she'd been assaulted at one end of the room, and she was on the floor crawling towards the kitchen in an attempt to escape. The blood spatters on the radiator and on the adjacent wall indicated that as she was crawling along, she was being hit with a blunt instrument repeatedly.
Post-mortem results then arrive, which further adds to the horrific nature of Mingzi's death.
A post-mortem found Mingzi's injuries were quite severe.
She had numerous injuries, more than 20 in total, mainly to her head. She also had, interestingly enough, some defence wounds, including a fracture to one of her hands, which clearly indicated that she'd been trying to fend the attacker off. But the actual number of injuries and the nature of those injuries were very, very severe and would only ever have resulted in one thing, which was her death. She'd basically been battered to death.
But as police scour the scene and surrounding areas, there is no sign of the murder weapon.
The weapon used was believed to be a very hard, heavy, blunt object. But interestingly enough, it wasn't recovered from the scene, which suggests that potentially the offender may have possibly brought it with them, but certainly taken it away with them, which does suggest a degree of premeditation and planning and the realisation, even in the moment of everything happening, that actually they might have left some evidence on that weapon.
Police start to suspect that their initial theory, that Mingzi disturbed a burglar who then attacked her, could be wrong. This is reinforced when detectives examine Mingzi's possessions.
Burglary is normally where somebody goes in and steals something. Sounds fairly obvious, but that's what happens. So if there were items in that house, such as TVs, electrical goods, jewellery, cash, you would expect someone that's committing a burglary to take those. The fact that items didn't appear to be missing is really important.
And new forensic evidence casts further doubt that Mingzi disturbed a burglary taking place.
The perpetrator had gone upstairs and opened a number of drawers, which made it look like a burglary. However, the intruder had done this after he'd assaulted Mingzi. We know that because Mingzi's blood was on the stairs in the form of footwear marks, and her blood was on the drawers in the form of finger marks, glove marks in blood. In my mind, your average burglar, if they're startled, they're just going to want to get out the property. They don't want to harm anybody, they just don't want to get caught. Why would a perpetrator repeatedly beat Mingzi and then take the risk of going upstairs to see if they could find something in her bedroom? It just didn't quite add up.
By re-examining the post-mortem results, police suspect this attack may actually have been carried out by someone closer to home.
The nature and the number of injuries and the fact that they were all caused to Mingzi's head area is a suggestion that perhaps this is a little bit more personal. It's almost like a humiliation and perhaps not just a stranger attack or a burglar that's been disturbed.
Considering the nature of Mingzi's injuries, the police would have to consider whether this was an argument that had gone wrong.
In the majority of murder cases, there is some kind of connection between the victim and the offender.
90% of murders are committed by people who know the victim, and normally very closely.
As police begin to suspect that Mingzi could have known her attacker and that whoever it was had a grudge against her, they look to her previous relationships, beginning with her ex-husband, 33-year-old Wai Hong Sang.
Police contacted Mr. Sang. He lived in the Grimsby area. He was a chemistry graduate with dual nationality, so he was a Brit as well as Chinese. He had gone through a recent divorce with Mingzi, and they shared a son together.
Police want to know where Sang was on the day his ex-wife was murdered.
Mr. Sang was asked to provide a written statement of his movements on the 17th. He disclosed to police that he had taken the day off work.
Sang's statement explains why he took the day off and outlines a clear alibi for the time Mingzi was murdered.
He had the day off work and he went to Sherwood Pines in the Nottingham area, where he went trail biking.
And he could provide car parking tickets and receipts to back this up.
With a solid alibi and evidence to prove it, Sang is discounted from the inquiries. So police shift their focus elsewhere, and to one person in particular.
The police, they would be examining who Mingzi had spoken to, who were the last people that had seen her. Obviously, in this case, Darren Grundy was virtually living at Mingzi Yang's address.
Darren Grundy would likely to have been the last person to see Mingzi Yang alive. He's the person who's in a current relationship with her. He's the person who discovered the body.
Mingzi Yang's fiancé, Darren Grundy, is taken in for questioning. And it isn't long before the police make an announcement.
Darren Grundy is arrested on suspicion of the murder of Mingzi Yang. He's taken into police custody, and the police think that they have their man.
All of Darren's clothing was seized and submitted to the laboratory for examination.
The police were convinced it obviously had the hallmarks of a crime of passion.
It's been 24 hours since the body of 29-year-old student Mingzi Yang was discovered at her home in the Lincoln suburb of Sincil Bank. And police have arrested her fiancé, 32-year-old Darren Grundy, on suspicion of murder.
Darren Grundy was the person that reported her death and was also possibly the last person to see her alive.
He was taken into police custody, during which time he's questioned and the police seek to gather further evidence and information to strengthen their case.
Police believe the attack on Mingzi was carried out by someone who knew her.
Police were convinced that this was a crime of passion. It's not unusual with crimes of passion that the victim is badly beaten. Mingzi had been beaten and sustained over 20 injuries.
The hallmarks of a crime of passion, I would say, are extreme violence, humiliation, degradation, that sort of thing. Doing something that's really personal So, destroying something that really means a lot to somebody. And often it is extreme, gratuitous violence where there's clearly been some kind of loss of self-control because it's such a personal issue.
Now in police custody, Darren faces intense questioning from detectives.
The interview of a murder suspect is different from the interview of a witness. It's far more detailed. The officers that interview a murder suspect will be specially trained, and they use tactics and techniques with the intention of getting as much information as possible. During the interviews, Darren Grundy maintains that he went to work that day and he was trying to get hold of Ming Xi Yang during the day. He couldn't get hold of her, so he decided to leave work early, and he came home from work early and he found her dead in the home.
But police aren't convinced by his account and detain him further.
In order to hold someone in custody for more than 36 hours, the police need to go to a magistrate's court in order to keep that person in custody. So this is a serious situation for Darren Grundy. He's in custody, and obviously the police think that they have their man.
When police receive forensic results from Darren Grundy's clothing, the findings change the course of the investigation.
When we looked at Darren's clothing in the laboratory, there was no blood spattering on there. The blood staining on him was quite minimal, and it's not what I would expect from the perpetrator. I would expect to find a lot of small spots of blood on the perpetrator's clothing, especially around his lower legs. If you imagine when Mingxi's moving around the room and she's being constantly struck, the blood is spattering onto that radiator. Those small spots of blood will also spatter back onto the assailant. Didn't see anything like that at all on Darren's clothing.
But then a member of the public comes forward with some information that turns the case on its head.
The Sincilbank area of Lincoln is a very tight-knit community, and following the news of Mingxi's death, the teenage boy who was in the Sincilbank area on the morning of Mingxi's murder did come forward. He reported to police that he had seen a cyclist loitering very closely to the back passage of Mingxi's address.
The young boy saw a man on the pedal cycle cycling around this area, and he actually saw him go into an alleyway, which is where the address in question is.
He remembered clearly that cyclist was wearing a blue workman's helmet rather than a cycling helmet. He made eye contact with the cyclist and then watched as he wheeled that bike into Mingxi's passageway.
But who was the cyclist? And could they be responsible for Mingxi's murder? The physical description the boy gives narrows down his identity.
This key witness reported to police the cyclist was also of East Asian appearance. The police now had to explore people who knew Mingxi matching that description.
And at this point, the police become aware that actually they've been looking at the wrong man. And they focus their inquiries in a different direction.
Darren Grundy is released without charge. And attention now falls on an individual from Mingxi's past.
The description of the cyclist matched Mingxi's ex-husband, Mr. Sang.
Wai Hong Sang had already provided police with a convincing alibi, saying he was over 40 miles from Mingxi's home on the day of her murder, enjoying a day out biking at Sherwood Pines Forest.
Mr. Sang has a solid alibi. He'd travelled to Sherwood Pines, where he had spent the day trail biking. So police are then tasked with establishing his movements exactly and whether it is possible that this cyclist could be Mr. Sang. In the eyes of the investigation, there is obviously a big difference between police suspecting that this cyclist may be Mr. Sang and may have committed the murder, but proving it to a jury is obviously a whole different matter.
In an attempt to track down the mysterious individual spotted by a local teenager, Police trawl through thousands of hours of CCTV from across Lincoln.
There are so many CCTV cameras now, private, local authority. People have them on their houses as well. It's a real critical part of any murder investigation. The police will be looking at trying to find that person at that location or as close as possible, and then trying to find where they went from there. Where did the cyclist come from? Ideally, what did they do whilst they were in the area, and then where did they go afterwards?
And after hours of rigorous detective work, police finally spot the cyclist.
What it actually showed was that this particular cyclist, who was quite distinctive in description, particularly with a hat that he was wearing, was picked up on 40 separate occasions in 16 different locations in and around the Lincoln City area. The route of the cyclist was quite clear from the footage that he'd come into the city in the early hours of the morning, then made his way out of the city again.
The man is seen cycling away from Lincoln just after 9 a.m., around 3 hours before Mingsi's body was discovered. Detectives analyse the footage to see if the cyclist in question is indeed Mingsi's ex-husband, Wai Hong Sang.
One of the main difficulties in proving identity of someone on CCTV is the quality of the footage. It's vastly improved since many years ago when it was really poor, but you still do have systems now, for one reason or another, that are not particularly clear. They're grainy. You may struggle to identify someone.
With the identity of the cyclist still unclear from the CCTV footage, police bring Sang in for questioning.
The police will be looking at his background, his movements, and his relationship, trying to gather as much information. They'll be looking at inconsistencies with his account, and it may be that he can't give certain information. So they'll be trying to build up a case against him using the factual information that they know and anything which can either confirm or disprove his account.
Under caution, Sang gives the same account he provided in his written statement.
Wei Sang told the police that he had gone to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham. He'd driven straight there from his home address in Grimsby, and he'd been there for the duration of the day. He was also able to produce some receipts from parking in the Nottingham area and a petrol receipt as well.
Despite Sang providing receipts to prove his alibi, police attempt to investigate his digital footprint by looking into his phone activity on the day.
He had turned his phone off when he left home, which he said was the usual thing that he would do when he was going trail biking.
So what the police decided to do instead was to examine the sat-nav on his car.
And what officers discover reveals a major hole in Sang's story.
The inbuilt car sat-nav actually showed that he hadn't gone directly from Grimsby to Nottingham, but he'd driven from Grimsby to Lincoln, where he'd parked in a lay-by for at least 2 hours, and then afterwards had then gone to Nottingham. So there was a huge hole in the alibi.
It's a shocking revelation. Police now know Sang was parked up in a lay-by on the outskirts of Lincoln on the day of Mingsi's murder. Could it be that Sang had cycled from this location to Mingsi's home in Sinsel Bank? Police look again at the CCTV of the suspicious cyclist.
The analysis of the cyclist on the CCTV showed quite clearly, with the times involved, that he would have had the opportunity to have parked his vehicle on the outskirts of Lincoln, cycled into Lincoln to Mingsi's address, killed Mingsi, and then cycled back out of the city again, back to his car, and then driven to Sherwood Pines in Nottingham, where he claimed that he'd been all day.
This key CCTV evidence proved Mr. Sang did have the time available to cycle into Lincoln and murder his ex-wife.
But the CCTV footage is still unable to prove if Wai Hong Sang was at Mingsi's home on the day of the murder. The only evidence police have is circumstantial, and unlikely to hold up in court. But then, forensic results from a search at Tsang's address returned from the lab.
The police submit various items for forensic examination from Wai Tsang. There were items which were actually purchased after he'd separated from Mingxi Yang.
We examined a number of items from him, including a watch. The watch, when you looked at it with a naked eye, it didn't look as though there was anything on it at all. So I think the watch had probably been cleaned. But in the laboratory, once we could look at it using a low-power microscope, we could manipulate the hinges, the links, and you could see that in between the links there were some small blood stains. Those samples of blood stains were then subject to DNA profiling tests, and the blood was attributable to Mingxi.
As well as the traces of Mingxi's blood found on her ex-husband's watch, further shocking evidence is found on a bicycle belonging to Tsang.
The bike that we examined was a different bicycle from the bike in the CCTV, but it was in the car on the day. The initial visual examination of that bicycle, we couldn't find any blood. But once we got it in the laboratory with specialised lighting and the low-power microscope, there was a small blood stain that was located on the handlebar. Again, that was subject to DNA profiling test, and that came back blood attributable to Mingxi. So, from my examination of these objects, it was obvious that he has tried to cover all of his tracks, and he has done so quite successfully because we've only found these two small blood stains. We examined many other items from that individual and didn't find anything on them. And he's obviously done a good job of covering his tracks, but these minute traces left in these difficult to locate areas is what indicated that he was the perpetrator.
Wai Hong Tsang is charged with the murder of his ex-wife, Mingxi Yang.
The police have circumstantial evidence. They have Wai Tsang in Lincoln, in the area at the time of the murder. They have the forensic evidence that links him as well. What they haven't got is a specific motive or a reason why he's committed this awful attack on his ex-wife.
Police obviously believed they had their man, but now they had to prove a motive. Why had Mr. Tsang chosen to kill his ex-wife?
"33-year-old Wai Hong Tsang has been charged with the murder of his ex-wife, 29-year-old Mingxi Yang, in the Sinselbank area of Lincoln. Having pleaded not guilty, the case is sent for trial.
Mr. Tsang's trial was heard at Lincoln Crown Court, which is a very old courtroom in the grounds of Lincoln Castle. It is all a wood panel building. The judge sits high above the courtroom in a wooden seat. The defendant sits opposite in the dock, and witnesses give evidence to his right. It is a very personal experience for everybody in the room.
As any officer involved in a murder case, you always will feel an amount of apprehension before a murder trial, because no matter how strong the case appears to be, and no matter how happy you are with how the investigation has gathered pace and been concluded at that point, there's always an opportunity and a chance that something could come up during the trial that could change the direction of things. And even if it is a technicality or something that doesn't directly impinge on the actual case itself, sometimes that can be something that influences a jury in a kind of negative way.
As the trial begins, local reporter Richard Van Plu observes Mingxi's alleged killer in the courtroom.
Tsang was very composed. He was obviously a very intelligent man and was following the proceedings intently, but showed little emotion.
The prosecution opens their case against Tsang.
The prosecution presented a strong case, backed by the CCTV evidence and the sat-nav evidence. But it wasn't an overwhelming case.
The prosecution in the case were looking to show that there was a degree of pre-planning and preparation in this case, the way that Wei Sang had behaved, the fact that he'd lied about where he'd been, that he came to Lincoln in his vehicle, then came on his pedal cycle into the city centre. The fact that there were so many injuries inflicted on Ming-Si Yang, it was clearly a personal attack, and it was clearly something that he'd planned, and he'd tried to cover his tracks very carefully.
The pathology evidence presented at trial showed that the injury that most likely killed Ming-Si was a brutal wound to the head. But the murder weapon was never recovered, and the prosecution suggested that this meant it was carried out by somebody with premeditation who had taken that weapon away and made sure that it wasn't found.
To the courtroom's surprise, Sang agrees to give evidence.
As a journalist in the courtroom, you sit in a wood-panelled seat right next to the witness box where Mr. Sang gave evidence. And confronted by the evidence from the sat-nav, Sang gave an account that he did leave his car in the lay-by near Lincoln. This differed from the account that he initially gave the police.
Sang agrees that yes, he did go to Lincoln, but rather than going into Lincoln City on a push bike, he said that he drove to the outskirts of Lincoln, he parked in a lay-by, and he slept for a couple of hours.
And the reason he gave for not telling the police this during his first account was that he didn't want his new partner to find out that he'd been sleeping.
The prosecution confronts Sang with the CCTV footage from the day of the murder. They are convinced this is Sang heading towards Sinsel Bank.
Sang was adamant that the cyclist in the blue work helmet was not him, and that he remained in his car asleep on the outskirts of Lincoln.
Wei Sang denies being the person on the pedal cycle. He simply says it's not him.
Despite the overwhelming forensic evidence against Sang, the court are yet to hear a motive behind the killing. But then, details of Ming-Si and Sang's marriage are revealed to the jury.
It's revealed that there was a history of coercion and abuse from Wei Sang against Ming-Si Yang. It's been going on for some time before they actually divorced. Domestic abuse, it's very rarely isolated. It's something that will often go on perhaps for years. I read a statistic recently that said that there were 50 incidents of domestic abuse that would normally occur before someone calls for help. And the victim will often put up with abuse or coercion for a long period of time before they eventually come to the point where they actually ask for help. Ming-Si Yang had actually reported previous incidents of domestic abuse to Humberside Police on 3 separate occasions before she moved to Lincoln, and actually before Darren Grundy had come onto the scene.
In 2012, Ming-Si divorced from Sang and moved to Lincoln to start a new life for herself. The pair then only saw each other when handing over their son to one another as part of an arrangement made by the court. The abuse that she had suffered appeared to have ended. But then, relations with her former husband took a sudden drop.
During the trial, it was established that the divorce between Ming-Si and Sang had not been straightforward. There had been some disagreements over the custody of their son. And obviously, that is something that can raise very high emotions.
Ming-Si and Sang had initially settled on shared custody of their son. But in the lead-up to that fateful morning, it appears Ming-Si had put in motion plans to end this.
They shared custody, but the prosecution put the motive on the basis that he got a letter a few days before where she wanted more custody of their son.
Wei Sang had received at least one letter in relation to those custody arrangements, so it's believed that actually Ming-Si Yang was looking to see more of her son, and Wei Sang wasn't happy with that, and this potentially was the reason why he killed her. In my experience, in a case involving children and personal relationships, it can be something on the face of it quite simple, and in isolation perhaps not as serious, that can send somebody over the edge, could potentially be a build-up of tension and stress over a period of time, and the person just kind of snaps.
In January 2015, the jury at Lincoln Crown Court returns its verdict. Wai Hong Zhang is found guilty of Mingzi Yang's murder. He is sentenced to a minimum of 28 years in prison.
At the end of the trial, the jury returned a guilty verdict on the charge of murder. They were obviously convinced by the prosecution case and returned an extremely quick verdict for a murder case. They took just 2 hours to find Zhang guilty.
Wai Zhang, I would say, was a cold-hearted individual, self-centred, deceitful, and clearly very violent.
But with his cleverly constructed alibi, initially deceiving police, was there a chance that Zhang could have walked away with murder?
This case stands out because the murderer prepared a very clever alibi before carrying out the killing. It is not unusual for people to try and create an alibi after they carry out a murder or a killing. But in my career as a crime reporter, there are probably only 2 or 3 other cases where someone has gone to such great lengths.
He's sat down and thought this through. He's obviously an intelligent person. He's covered his tracks. He just tells me that, yeah, he is that kind of cold, calculated kind of a person.
If it wasn't for the blood on the bike and the watch, although he is on the outskirts of Lincoln, it's not beyond reasonable doubt that a jury could have been convinced that he wasn't a cyclist.
The case really turned on the forensic evidence. You know, he may well have got away with that murder in years gone by, but fortunately with the advances in forensic science and the specialist CCTV that's available and the experts nowadays, he was quite rightly tracked down and sentenced.
If this murder had happened 30 years ago, at the start of my career, it's probably quite unlikely that he would have been convicted.
With Zhang now behind bars, the community reflects on the impact Mingzi's death has had on her family.
It's so traumatic. She was so young and she moved here, she wanted a better life, but she hasn't witnessed a whole life yet.
I think this case is shocking in terms of the level and the nature of the injuries. The sentence reflects the seriousness of the offence. Hopefully it may bring some small comfort to Mingzi's family moving forward. But at the end of the day, nothing will bring Mingzi Yang back, and it leaves a young boy growing up without his mother.
Shocking true crime Wednesday at 9 on Sky Mix, when a victim of circumstance is in the wrong place at the wrong time in You Murdered at First Sight.
Is it the building that's on fire?
It is, yeah.
It is, okay then.
I got out. I managed to get out.
Right then. It's okay. Is everybody out of the building?
No, there's still my partner in.
Right, is he able to get out of the building?
No, because there's fires near the door.
When the call came in, it seemed an unlikely town and an unlikely venue for this sort of thing to happen. At a joinery shop, after tea, when you wouldn't expect people to be working, things just didn't seem quite right.
Everybody was really quite worried. You know, it could have been the person that you walked past in the street, it could have been anybody.
I don't know how anybody could live with it, knowing that they burnt somebody alive
Everybody was so shocked and everybody was locking up more and feeling a bit worried about it all because nothing like this had ever happened in the village.
A few miles from the bustling seaside resort of Skegness sits the small, picturesque market town of Burgh-le-Marsh, affectionately known by its residents as the Village.
Everybody here calls it a village because we feel like village people. We're so connected and so we help one another.
Burgh-le-Marsh is a typical Lincolnshire village on the edge of the Lincolnshire Wolds, famous for its windmill, where people are hard-working and just get on with their lives.
I've had a salon in Burgh-le-Marsh for 14, 15 years, and it's a lovely, quiet village where everybody knows everybody. Everybody gets on with everybody, and my clients are lovely.
But the peaceful tranquility of the village is about to go up in flames.
We've just gone up to the workshop to pick some things out.
Yeah.
And somebody came up with us behind.
Yeah.
And they attacked us and set fire to the place.
The workshop on fire belongs to well-known local couple David Twigg and Julie Dixon, who own a joinery business next to their home. As the emergency call comes in, Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Station Commander Gary Milson is immediately dispatched to the scene.
Once I received the call, I'd be straight into my car and making headway down to Burgh-le-Marsh. It's only a few miles down the road. There's not a lot of time to mull over things and get other information in. The information that was relayed to me at that point was that two men dressed in black and wearing balaclavas had accosted David Twigg and his partner. They'd locked David into the storeroom and then proceeded to pour petrol into the foyer of the building and lit it before fleeing the scene. As I approached the premise, there was a white picket fence surrounding it. It seemed quite surreal, the appliances at the bottom with the lights on. As I walked past that towards the entrance where the activity was taking place, the incident commander gave me a quick brief and said that there was very little fire and the fire was out, and they was now trying to locate David Twigg, who they'd been informed was locked in a room inside the building.
With the blaze having been brought under control and extinguished, Gary and his team desperately tried to locate David Twigg.
The workshops were an old railway buildings. They were long and thin, and at the end there was a small area with a kitchen, a storeroom and a toilet and a small foyer that linked these all together. And they were all involved in the fire. They was all black and heated and sooty, but they were all empty apart from the storeroom door that was locked. There was no keys present. The decision was made that the wall might be easier to break through than the door, and a hole was made in the wall, and we could see that there was somebody who appeared to be on the knees facing the door. We tried to rouse them through shouting and speaking to them, but there was no response.
With David not responding, the urgency to reach him grows and the fire crew break deeper into the wall, releasing the door.
As the door opened, David Twigg fell forward into our arms and forward onto the floor. The crews immediately turned him over and began resuscitation. We had an ambulance already in attendance and the paramedics were very quickly there, and we assisted the paramedics in placing him into the ambulance where they could work on him further.
In the back of the ambulance, paramedics battle to resuscitate David Twigg.
The time frame from the call to us getting David out of the cupboard may have been around about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we worked on him for probably another 15-20 minutes after that before the paramedics decided to call time and pronounce him dead.
With David dead, the situation immediately changes. A murder investigation is launched.
The first information I got was that there'd been a fire at a business premises
near Skegness in Lincolnshire, of course, and that 2 men had been involved. They'd made off, where they hadn't been found at the moment. A man had tragically died, believed to be the owner of the business, and his partner, who worked with him, a lady, had been quite badly injured in the incident. She was being taken to hospital to be treated, and officers were at the scene. So lots of things going through your mind, but at no stage anything other than, this is a murder case. It's tragic. David Twigg has died, and we need to find these 2 people as soon as possible.
With fire crews, police and paramedics at the scene, it isn't long before news of the tragedy spreads around the town.
It was a big event for Lincolnshire. A robbery homicide in a small village like Borough-le-Marsh is something that had never happened before in my 25 years covering the area, and it may well never happen again.
Rumours I heard was they was looking for 2 men, and my house faces a back field, and of course the drones was going over there. There was quite some noise, and I couldn't believe it actually.
The whole village were stunned that something could have happened on the doorsteps.
It was big news, and everybody was really quite worried that whoever did it could have been out there and they could have been next. You just don't know.
There was a lot of anxiety in the community. Borough-le-Marsh is a long way from the nearest police station, a long way sometimes from the nearest police officer, and local people were obviously very concerned that they may be the victim of a similar burglary.
In the Lincolnshire town of Borough-le-Marsh, police have launched a murder investigation after local joiner David Twigg was pronounced dead following a fire at his workshop. His partner, Julie Dixon, had managed to escape and call 999, reporting that masked intruders had broken in, locked David in the storeroom, and set the place on fire.
The impact on the local community after this happened was immense. It's the only way I can describe it. I was clearly getting phone calls. The local community officers were being stopped in the street. People were going to the police station. There was a kind of sense of not just why has this happened, but who's responsible, and just as importantly, is it going to happen again? Is somebody else going to be, the target of these 2 individuals? And nobody could think of a reason why David and Julie would be targeted.
David Twigg was an only son. He grew up in the area. His parents remained in the area. He was a master joiner, very popular and a hard-working man in the local area. He was also a very big man, well over 6 feet tall and 19 stone, but he was a presence in the community.
David met Julie in 1996 when she was going through a divorce. The pair quickly moved in together.
They remained together for 15 years. They came across as a typical middle-aged couple. In Borough-le-Marsh, David and Julie were seen as a team. David was the carpenter, the joiner at the business, and Julie was doing the finance and the accounts for the business.
Outside of joinery, David soon discovered a new hobby, stock car racing, which opened up a whole new social circle for him and Julie, with professional racer John Mickle and his wife Lisa.
So from that very first race meeting, really kind of just kicked it off. We enjoyed each other's company. They wanted to come to every single race meeting. They wanted to be involved.
And David soon found a way to combine work with his newfound love when he set up a sideline alongside his joinery company.
As David's business grew, he was quite happy to sponsor the motor racing team. That was one of his passions, and so they undertook that deal, which was several £1,000s.
Julie and David were keen to promote this new Kitchen Bits and Bobs business, which is an online business that they were trying to get off the ground. I think they felt that probably some branding on the race cars, and then obviously we can promote it through social media as well.
The sponsorship proved very successful. David particularly got on very well with the racing team, and they were invited over to America to watch the team racing, and all seemed well. It was a very happy relationship, and he got on very well with them.
I think from the beam on his face when we first, agreed at Liddon Hill, he just seemed incredibly proud. He seemed very smiley. You could tell he was passionate about his business, and this was something that he felt was going to enhance the people that would see his work.
The friendship between the two couples started to grow stronger.
I think from the very first time we met them, I really, really liked what they brought to the team and, the energy. And we call it a race family, and it just felt like they were going to become part of our race family. Julie wanted to be hands-on with me in the kitchen, while David was very quick to throw himself into the deep end with John on the mechanic side as well. They just got stuck in. It wasn't just about the racing anymore. They started to get quite involved. She wanted to be involved in the family life that we had as well. She would buy presents for my children, who were aged 4 and 7 then. They looked fondly upon her and David as well. So they became family friends.
And it was Lisa Julie turned to in the aftermath of the tragedy of David's death.
The very first time I heard about David was on Monday morning. I had a phone call somewhere between 7 and 7:30 in the morning from Julie. She basically was hysterical. She was shouting down the phone, "He's dead, he's dead." And I really didn't have a clue what she was even talking about. I didn't know who's dead. I said, "Julie, who's dead?" She said, David's dead. And I then tried to get some more information. What's happened? She said, a fire. So none of her sentences were very long. It was just words being thrown out at me. I said, a fire? What, there's a house fire? She said, no, workshop, fire, masked men, attacked. From that phone call, I immediately knew I had to go and visit her straight away. I knew it would be a long journey up to Lincolnshire, probably 4 hours. I just grabbed my purse, my keys, and left. So the 4 hours going there was, it's a very weird and surreal situation. You keep thinking, has this really happened? Is this some kind of, is this true? Is it real? I just can't get my head around it. It's an awful lot of information, hearing her so upset on the phone. And those words, he's dead, they just kept playing and playing in my head.
When Lisa arrives at Julie's parents' house, she finds Julie in a state of shock.
Julie was sitting and rocking in a chair. I was absolutely taken back when I first saw her because she had burns on her face. She told me that her and David, on the Sunday, had gone down to the yard, which is just a short stroll from the house, to lock up. That's all they were doing. They were going to lock up. She said that she had asked David to go into the storeroom to get a light bulb. And these two men wearing balaclavas, dressed in black and hoodies, had come into the barn, had locked David in the cupboard, and then had grabbed her. And that they had tried and forced her towards this circular saw. I asked her how she got away, and she said, I just squirmed out of... She said, lucky I was wearing a hoodie. I squirmed out of it and ran. She said she ran out of the door, she ran across the field, and then I think after a short space of time, she turned round to look back to see that these intruders were also leaving the premises and that they'd shut the door behind them. She was then concerned about David, so she went back to the barn. And when she opened the door, suddenly the combustion, the flames, that's what had caused the burns to her face.
While Lisa consoles her heartbroken friend, police turn up to interview Julie as a key witness to the crime.
She was only able to give some basic details. We didn't want to push too hard, of course. She's a victim. She's lost David in the most awful circumstances. Clearly, the 999 call provided us with a little bit of information, which was helpful, but we wanted to try and dig deeper if we could, so we had to ask those difficult questions as early as possible. She was interviewed by specially trained officers, but sometimes it just wasn't possible to continue with interviews because Julie wasn't in a emotionally fit state to carry on at that point. So we had to do lots of short sections rather than a really long and draining and demanding interview.
With little information gleaned from Julie and unease growing among the locals, police turned to the public for help.
In the hours that followed, Lincolnshire Police made appeals for the intruders and did reveal that a 999 call had been made by Julie Dixon and gave the description of these two masked men who had been to the workshop, and that Julie had managed to push one of them away and escape, and then rang the fire brigade on 999.
I remember holding more than one press conference, which wasn't just local and regional, it was national as well, because this was big news in terms of what had happened and where it had happened and the type of community that it was affecting.
As Lincolnshire Police continued to make these appeals, we would take that information and circulate it amongst the various radio stations, local newspapers, daily newspapers in Lincolnshire. And the police were obviously very anxious to get that message out as wide as possible.
With Lincolnshire Police desperately trying to piece together the events of the night and establish the identity of the masked men, Fire Commander Gary Milson scours the crime scene for clues.
Once the fire's been extinguished, we then start on the scene preservation side of it. And as we withdraw from the building, we're trying to make sure that anything that has been removed out of the building is logged or is placed back into the building with care, so that should we need to, we can rebuild that picture, that jigsaw puzzle, to help us find out how the fire started.
I've dealt with quite a few fires, and unfortunately fatal fires as well, and murder cases, and it's probably one of the most challenging cases that you have to deal with, because by its very nature, fire destroys, and fire destroys evidence, not just the fire itself, but the water that's used.
Having established petrol was used as the accelerant, Senior Investigating Officer Stuart Gibbon begins trying to make sense of the scene.
All police officers and detectives are constantly reminded about how important the golden hour is. It's a time where you can lose evidence, but if you get it right and you gather the evidence and you secure and preserve that evidence, it can have a positive impact on the rest of the investigation. The golden hour in this particular investigation was kind of twofold. One was about securing the workshop to make sure that we could get access to it and that nobody else used it, and it could be forensically examined over a period of days, which it was. Also, from a financial point of view, it wasn't going to be a kind of random attack. That is something that I almost eliminated from a very early stage, simply because of where it is. So was it a customer that had been in before? And then you start to think about the reasons why. Is it financial? Is it a robbery or a burglary that's gone wrong? Did David owe somebody some money and they were trying to recover the money? So we drafted in a financial investigator working with the police, and he was starting to look at the actual basics of the business, how it was doing financially, what was going on.
Could David have been targeted for money? Was it a revenge attack for a business deal gone wrong? Or something closer to home?
So Julie did actually send me a few messages, and she called me quite distressed, probably a couple of weeks before David was killed. She did say that her telephone had been cut off, but then was restored again. She said that her electricity had been cut off, but restored again. She felt that someone was messing around with them.
Aware that this information could be key to the investigation, Lisa contacts the police.
So we had what are known as a POLSA team, Police Search Advisor team, specialist search officers that did a kind of fingertip search in the parameters around the building. And actually they found something which
appeared quite significant. Deposited in some bushes on a neighbouring piece of land next to the joinery workshop, they found some keys, and we were able to establish at a slightly later point that one of those keys fitted the storeroom that David had been locked inside. So this is quite a significant find for us. Obviously, those items were forensically examined. They didn't yield any evidence. But the finding of those keys supported, at that point, the account that Julie Dixon had given, because they were found in the direction that the two offenders were alleged to have gone off in.
Further inquiries begin to yield some surprising discoveries.
I think the first kind of breakthrough in terms of new information for the investigation wasn't, surprisingly, to do with the two offenders. It was to do with the financial affairs, if you like. We'd been led to believe by the inquiries that we conducted that the business was in a good place financially, that David was doing well, and that the accounts were healthy. In actual fact, when we had a financial investigator start to look more closely at the accounts and the business, the opposite was true. They were in dire financial straits, on the verge, if not already, bankrupt, and there was some serious financial issues.
Having been unaware of the financial issues at David's business, further inquiries throw up more concerns.
The post that was going to the business was supposed to be going to David Twigg Joinery, had been redirected to this garage. And that was quite a big point for us as well, because then that begs the question, well, why is the post being redirected? Who's redirecting it? And what lies behind that?
In Lincolnshire, the investigation into the murder of David Twigg has thrown up some suspicious activity around his business.
It soon became clear that both the workshop and the bungalow where they lived had been remortgaged.
Finances were becoming a little bit more of a priority line of inquiry, and we needed also to know why the post was being redirected to another address. We were still keeping an open mind. Obviously, we were still trying to establish these two master offenders, who they were, where they were, why they'd done what they did. But also these other things were starting to kind of build up in terms of the finances, first and foremost, very, very different to how we'd initially thought they were.
While the investigation homes in on David's financial affairs and whether his death could be linked to a business deal, 2 months after his murder, David's body is released so he can finally be laid to rest. Friend Lisa accompanies David's partner Julie to the funeral.
That was a huge, big turning point for us. Suddenly my gut feeling started to take over. The funeral, she acted very strange for someone that was basically saying the last goodbye to a partner. She would crack jokes, and quite inappropriate jokes, acting slightly inappropriately towards people. She was laughing very, very loud. Then suddenly she'd be upset. It just seemed really irrational. And I felt uncomfortable.
But it isn't just friends who have their concerns. Having uncovered some financial irregularities surrounding David and Julie's business, Lincolnshire Police have more questions.
Yeah, we were looking for answers to these questions, and the only person that really could probably provide them was Julie Dixon. I was conscious that we were asking her a lot of questions and being quite direct with her, when actually, on the face of it, she was a victim of the most awful circumstances. But we had to ask those questions. We weren't always given the answers that we were looking for.
As well as the finances, police inquiries with David's creditors flag up something else.
All the inquiries that we carried out with the businesses and the authorities that were dealing with this financial debt, nobody had ever spoken personally or otherwise with David Twigg. Every kind of communication, be it on the telephone, email, that sort of thing, was with Julie Dixon. And what we also uncovered, which was really quite concerning, was that people were being told by Julie that David was terminally ill, that he was abroad on holiday, that he was really unable to take any calls for various different reasons. And this concerned us because we couldn't corroborate this in any way.
Having also discovered the post addressed to David's business was being redirected to a local garage, Stuart and his team trawl through the garage's CCTV, hoping it will reveal who is behind the redirection. Instead, they find another clue.
And when we examined that CCTV, we found that Julie had driven there in a vehicle on the morning of the murder and had filled up petrol cans with petrol at the location. And when we did challenge her with finding that information in the CCTV footage, she told us, yes, I did go to the garage that morning. We were doing some gardening and I needed to get some petrol to fill the lawnmower up. We established also that Julie had a BlackBerry-type mobile phone, and as part of a murder investigation, you're always looking at mobile phone data because it can tell you a lot of things, and we couldn't get into it. So clearly we asked Julie on more than one occasion, could you please help us and tell us what the PIN number is so we can access this device? She was unable to do so. She said that she'd forgotten, she couldn't remember it. Clearly she had been using it very recently and on the day of the murder. We had evidence of that. If nobody else uses it and nobody else has changed the PIN or password, then she must know that number or that code. What's in that BlackBerry? Why won't she tell us the PIN number? We really desperately needed to get to the bottom of what had happened, and this was the point where the investigation focus really changed.
As the months tick by, friends of Julie also start to have their doubts as to what really occurred that fateful night.
One race meeting that I remember very, very clearly was the last race meeting that she's ever come to. When we arrived there was a police car there. She started screaming and hitting things, shouting at the top of her voice, making some very loud noises. And I just said, Julie, talk to me. What's wrong? Why are you upset? She sat, she rocked, she cried, she rocked, she cried. And then she started saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And I just said, what are you sorry for? Tell me what you're sorry for. She rocked, she cried, I'm sorry. And it was like a repeated process. She said nothing else, she did nothing else.
While Julie spends a weekend away with friends, back at the investigation, forensic evidence starts to build up.
Now, the account Julie gave was that the two men had come in, there'd been a tussle, she'd managed to get out of the place, and she'd gone to ring 999, and then she'd noticed them running out, the two offenders, and they ran off round the back, and she went back in to try and rescue David or find him, and as she opened the door, there was a flashback, and she was hit with the fumes from the fire and the explosion. And that was how she got the injuries. Actually, forensic evidence would say otherwise and would indicate that it was what's known as a vapour cloud.
When the petrol would be originally poured into the foyer and lit, as the petrol's ignited, the vapour cloud would ignite first. And anybody in that vicinity would get caught in that vapour cloud. And depending on the amount of vapour and the intensity of it, they may just get slight singeing and flash burns, or they could indeed get quite badly burnt. That seemed to be fitting more with the burns to Julie Dixon than rather what she was telling us, that she would open the door and it flared up. In fact, we considered it quite unlikely that she had opened the door and the petrol had flared up like that. Once it's lit, it's done that initial flare up, and it's unlikely that would happen again. There was a petrol can behind the door. Had she have opened the door right at the start of the fire, she would have moved the petrol can, so that evidence didn't add up.
We also recovered from a forensic examination of the bungalow some very small hairs in the bathroom sink. Now, again, on the surface, first viewing, not particularly relevant, but when we have those sent off to be forensically examined and we find out that they belong to Julie Dixon, those hairs, again, not particularly relevant, it's her bathroom, she uses the bathroom, there are going to be hairs. They were identified as eyelash or eyebrow hairs, but they were singed, they were burned. That put a kind of different slant on it as well.
Finding burned eyebrow hairs revealed Julie had gone into the bathroom after the fire had started, knowing full well her partner was trapped inside a burning building, something which raises suspicion among the police. Not only that, but the fire investigators believe Julie could only have received her injuries if she'd been inside the building when the fire started.
Julie Dixon had given various different accounts. She'd given us very little information. The more we tried to put to her by way of questions, the more withdrawn she'd become at that point, and actually became quite defensive at various times as well. And it was at that point that I made the decision, based on all the anomalies and the significant findings, she was going to be arrested on suspicion of the murder of her partner, David.
Three months after David's death, and news of Julie's arrest soon spreads around her hometown.
Obviously, there had been a lot of anxiety and fright in the community about intruders being at large. So in some ways, the arrest of Julie put that to bed. But equally, there was also some anger that obviously they'd spent 3 months believing Julie's story.
There was a lot of upset people. She had upset a lot of people because she befriended, well, she was everybody's friend. She was a very likeable person. And yeah, it was a big shock to everybody.
Julie Dixon is brought into the police station for formal questioning, this time as a suspect, not as a witness.
I was prepared, I thought, for most things to come from that interview, including a no-comment interview, which is quite common. So we'd gathered together as a group, the interviewing officers, the SIO, the interview coordinator, to discuss what could happen. But what actually did happen, I think it's fair to say, threw us all at that point. She provided a prepared statement, and what it said in a nutshell was that this whole situation had been a suicide pact. So what she said was that both her and David had wanted to die due to the dire financial circumstances around the business and personal issues, and that they were preparing to do just that, but that when the crunch came to lighting the petrol and setting the fire, she panicked and ran out of the building, leaving David behind.
In Lincolnshire, police are questioning David Twigg's partner on suspicion of his murder.
My initial thoughts were that if Julie was prepared to lie about two masked raiders and invent a story around what had actually happened, then what else had she lied about?
In interview, Julie claims the fire was a joint suicide pact, but that she had panicked and fled. So police need to establish if there is any truth in her account.
Let's go back and speak to friends and family. What sort of state of mind was David in? And actually, fairly quickly, it was established that he was in a good state of mind. He had no idea, we think, that the business was in such dire straits. He had no reason to die.
There's no way that David in his right mind would do a suicide pact, because he loved life too much and he was enjoying it too much. You know, the weeks before he got killed, he was down with us, enjoying it, planning the next year, the next trips, where we were going. He would never had that in his back of his mind. So we knew for ourselves then that she was bonkers and she had done it, and she was now trying to get herself out of a murder.
Suddenly, here we are. It's now a suicide pact. And who has a suicide pact but's locked behind a door that they don't have the key to, so they couldn't even change their mind if they wanted to? Poor David died on his hands and knees in a praying position, leaning against a door that was locked from the outside. That's not a suicide pact.
With time running out to hold Julie Dixon without charge, Senior Investigating Officer Stuart Gibbon consults with the Crown Prosecution Service.
So we clearly were very concerned about this prepared statement and just felt that it was probably another way of shifting focus. You know, we've had the masked offenders, they no longer exist now, so now we're going to go down the suicide pact, which is, interestingly enough, is a partial defence to murder, and if found to be true, could result in a conviction for manslaughter rather than murder. So that kind of made sense at that point. We had CPS working with us, so we could talk to them about the content of that prepared statement. They were already fully au fait with the evidence that we gathered that far. And the CPS lawyer was happy at that point that there was sufficient evidence to provide a realistic prospect for conviction. So the decision was made to charge Julie Dixon with murdering her partner, David Twigg.
With Dixon charged with murder, police and CPS prepare for trial, and part of that means trying to establish a motive. Why would Julie want David dead?
The main strands of evidence, really, I mean, there were quite a few bits of circumstantial as well, the petrol and the redirection of the post, but the main ones were really the finances. You know, we found out that they were in dire straits. What I think is that it was getting to the point where a warrant was issued for non-payment of fines. The bailiffs were going to turn up at the workshop at some point. That is the stage where David would become aware of the scale of this debt, in fact the debt existed at all maybe, and Julie Dixon could then hold that back no longer. That was where it was all going to come to a head.
As well as discovering the couple were in serious financial trouble, police now had CCTV proving Julie purchased petrol on the day of the murder. But it's forensic evidence of a computer found in the couple's workshop which really helps build the case for the prosecution.
We'd heard stories that she'd been Googling stuff on a laptop, claiming that David had been Googling stuff. How do you commit suicide with it being undetected?
She was Googling on her laptop how to poison someone with cakes and how to get away with murder.
As the trial approaches, Julie Dixon changes her story yet again.
Things kind of changed a little bit again when Julie Dixon then started to say that it wasn't a suicide pact. Actually, David did want to die, and she was just trying to help him along, basically. So she's trying to remove herself even further from any kind of blame whatsoever. You know, it was David's idea. David wanted to do it. I just kind of helped him. Things had changed hugely since the first 999 call to the emergency services, but we felt we had a strong case. On the second day of that hearing, the not guilty plea, which had been entered initially by Julie Dixon, changed to a guilty plea, but she still maintained at that point that this had been all about David wanting to die. That's what the defence was putting forward, whereas our defence was cold-blooded, premeditated, pre-planned murder.
With Julie's shocking confession, the trial is halted.
Once Julie Dixon had admitted her guilt and pleaded guilty to David's murder, the role of the jury was no longer needed, but then falls to the judge to decide on what basis he believes her plea and on what basis the killing was carried out. So this is what is called a Newton hearing, and the judge hears evidence from all the parties in the case, and it's in the judge's role to decide how the murder was carried out effectively.
The prosecution lays out its case to the judge, and Julie's 999 call is played to the court.
The characters and set fire to the place.
So the place that actually set fire?
Yeah.
Is it the building that's on fire?
It is, yeah.
It is, okay then.
I got out. I managed to get
Right then. It's okay. Is everybody out of the building?
No, there's still my partner in.
The phone call, on the face of it, sounded very genuine. She sounded distraught. She was hysterical. But actually, the first information imparted was more of an account about what they'd been doing, like a rehearsal, rather than just saying, I need help and I need help quickly.
Over 5 days, the court hears how Julie's account changed throughout the investigation. From masked intruders to a joint suicide pact, to her assisting David in his own bid to take his own life.
The defence argued, once Julie Dixon had pleaded guilty, that matters had spiralled out of control and that in some ways this had been an emotional response from Julie Dixon, almost that she had panicked because of the financial difficulties she got into. However, I think from the prosecution's point of view, and certainly from the police point of view, this was a perpetrator who had changed her accounts whenever it had suited her, whenever she had been confronted with new evidence. There was always a line of defence. So it's hard not to see her really as a very skillful and manipulative liar.
Julie Dixon didn't take the stand at all, didn't give evidence, was again very impassive, didn't present any emotion at any stage of the court proceedings, merely sat in the dock and appeared to be listening to the proceedings.
The extent of the couple's financial difficulties is revealed to the judge.
David wouldn't have had a clue about that bankruptcy. He was quite happy going about his everyday business. I think if he had found out that he had been declared bankrupt, he would have been incredibly upset, being such a proud man. So, yeah, she obviously kept that from him. And I can't see that those finances would have been enough for anyone to lose their life over.
At the end of that hearing, Judge Heath had to decide whose account he believed. And he came firmly down on David Twigg's side and said that he in no way believed that David Twigg had wanted to commit suicide, and he described Julie Dixon's account as a pack of lies.
The judge was quite damning in his comments and quite clear that he thought it was a cold-blooded murder and that, you know, she'd been kind of playing the part, and it was potentially worthy of an Oscar nomination if it hadn't been so sad and so true.
Julie Dixon is sentenced to life with a minimum of 23 years for the murder of David Twigg. 11 years on, he is still remembered fondly.
No sentence can ever bring back a loved one. It will never be enough, of course, and it will never bring David back. But I just hope it brings some little comfort to the loved ones and those who loved David so much.
It just beggars belief that anyone would do that to another human being, a living person, someone you're supposed to care about, your partner. It's just incredibly difficult to understand how anyone would do that.
I think the hardest thing is to wrap your head around is the way she calculated it, how she planned it all. What else was she planning? What else was she thinking? They say it's down to money. We'll never know. Obviously, she don't care about anybody because obviously she did what she did. So no one will ever know what's going through her head.
This investigation and this case impacted hugely on the community and the village of Burley Marsh. You know, people aren't going to forget what happened. It lives with them forever, and whenever the name of the village is sometimes mentioned, people will talk about this case. I know I certainly will never forget it.
When a routine call to a house fire turns into the biggest murder investigation in Welsh history, you know you're in for a chilling ride. New Murder in the Valleys starts Wednesday at 9.
The 999 call was made at 7:44 that evening. All that Mandy Joseph could scream down the phone at that point was, "Help, help."
There were sounds of a gunshot and a woman screaming for help, and then the line went dead.
There's been a murder. I said, well, what do you mean there's been a murder? He said, yeah, they found 2 women murdered up by the garage. It's got to be them.
It's something that is totally unbelievable. To kill them both, it was just devastating. And you just could never, ever imagine something like that happening in Oakcliffe.
It was vicious in the extreme.
When officers reviewed the CCTV, they identified a vehicle that came down the pathway around the time of the murder, and these are the people responsible for the deaths.
Oakcliffe, a quintessentially English village situated in the heart of Bedfordshire. Best known for being the birthplace of British explorer Arthur Henry Newman.
Oakcliffe is a smallish village in mid-Bedfordshire, straddles the A5. It's a quiet village. It's on a route between Dunstable in the south and Milton Keynes in the north.
Everyone knows everyone, really, so it's quite a nice little place to live and to stay and to be, really.
It's a lovely local community with a pub and a lovely little school. There's not a lot of trouble. It's a good little village.
I'd say the community is quite close-knit. A lot of people know a lot of other people, so everyone kind of knows everybody.
And central to the community and village life was Iris Jones and her husband.
Iris was a much-loved figure in the village, well known in the village. She'd lived here for years and years. She was known especially for the fact that she had fostered something like 120 children, she and her husband, over a sort of 30-year period, starting in the 50s and going through to the mid-1980s.
She was a woman who had fostered over 100 children. The local community held her in the highest regard.
She literally was an angel walking amongst us.
Auntie was, once you got to know her, she had a heart of gold. And she'd do anything for anybody.
She was much loved, a caring, compassionate person who opened up her home to countless children less fortunate.
I mean, it became a way of life to her, fostering several children there who we actually grew up with. And as I say, she was, that was her life, kids, really.
Iris's husband died in 1993, leaving Iris a widower. She remained close to her children, including her foster daughter, Mandy, whom she relied on.
Mandy Jones was fostered by Iris when she was about 4 years old. She's had a proper mother-daughter relationship throughout her whole life. Mandy was 34 years old. She was a carer herself. She worked in the care industry. Her whole life was about caring for others.
And when Iris's husband died, she moved back in with her foster mother to care for her in her declining health.
She was a caring girl. There was nothing she wouldn't do for you.
Iris walked with the aid of a frame and walking stick. She had heart problems, she had diabetes, and she had failing eyesight. In later years, as Iris's health declined, Mandy took a much more active role in the care of her foster mother, looking after her, caring for, making sure she had everything she needed.
Please, how can I help?
The 999 call was made at 7:44 that evening, and it was made by Mandy Joseph. All that Mandy Joseph could scream down the phone at that point was, "Help, help."
Then the line went dead. If a 999 call is cut off or goes dead for whatever reason, the operator will review what they've already heard. In this case, there was a woman screaming for help, so they would then dispatch units to the house.
Mandy's screams were not the only disturbing sound the police operator heard.
There were sounds of a gunshot, a woman screaming for help, and the control room inspector would then decide on the appropriate level of response because of the high level of risk to both the officers attending and the public. It's a proportionate response to dispatch a firearms team. In this case, it was always going to be a firearms team.
The call handlers did try to call back and there was no response, but the police were able to trace where the call had been made from, and that resulted in police being sent to the property, including armed police officers, who forcefully gained entry into the house that evening. The house where the shooting had taken place was up a gravel drive and situated behind a garage forecourt.
There's a petrol station, and by the side of it there was a track that led down to this detached house.
Upon arrival, the armed officers were met with a gruesome sight.
They found Iris, she was lying by the sink. A further search of the house located Mandy in the lounge.
The women had been shot. Iris had been shot twice. Mandy had been shot 4 times. Shotgun cartridges were found at the house. So it was clear to the police officers that it was a shotgun killing of both women.
Immediately, police get to work preserving the scene.
Once the scene's been cordoned off, we'll be thinking about fast-track actions. What is it that we can do now to move the investigation on? The house was set back from the road, so was there any CCTV that could be reviewed straight away? What we want to do is try and identify the offenders as soon as possible.
We were sitting here watching telly, and all we could hear was sirens and a lot of commotion. And I went out and I could see the helicopter flying over Auntie's house. And I come in and I said, "There's something up," to the wife. And at the time, we had a phone, and I rang up my father and I said, "There's something going on up Auntie's house." And then my father rang me and said, "There's been a murder." And I said, "Well, what do you mean there's been a murder?" He said, "Yeah, they found 2 women murdered up by the garage." And then the bell began to sink in, and I can remember my father saying to me then, "It's got to be them." And that was a shock and a half when we knew it was both of them.
Quick assessments of the house revealed that there was no one else on the scene. However, it appeared that some items had gone missing.
A DVD was taken, the women's handbags were taken.
The motive looked like it was burglary.
Was this a burglary gone wrong?
It was just devastating, absolutely devastating. And you just could never, ever imagine something like that happening in Ockliffe.
I think everyone talks to everybody, and it would be a very short period of time until everyone knew the situation.
I mean, this is a quiet area. People will tell you that. It was quiet then, it's quiet now. To get a double shooting, 2 people dead in the village, truly exceptional.
And the question on everybody's lips was, who had committed such a heinous murder?
In a little village, or little villages, things spread quite quick. And people were all concerned because things like that don't happen. It's a nightmare.
This was a shocking crime for the village of Hockliffe. Somebody using that amount of force on 2 helpless women has only one intention, and that is to kill them.
In the quiet Bedfordshire village of Hockliffe, news has spread of the brutal murder of Iris Jones and her foster daughter, Mandy Joseph.
This is the house where Iris Jones and her late husband, Clifford, cared for 120 foster children. But this kindness was to prove her downfall.
The local community, and it was a quiet little area, were obviously shocked by the whole incident and very sad at the loss of 2 well-respected members of the community.
Everyone knew about it. It was the talk of the village. I as I moved along the high street, talking to people, everyone was aware of what had happened.
Lots of people knew Iris Jones, knew Mandy, and they were just stunned that two pillars of the community, two kind, caring people, should have had their lives ended in such a way.
To me, as silly as it sounds, it's a bit like when Lady Di died, all went quiet, you know? And I think that's how it was. There was so many police around and all that lot, but it shocked everyone, really shocked the villages, not just Occliffe.
With fear spreading through the community, police need to quickly establish the circumstances around the murders.
Once the scene's been cordoned off, the police will look for any fast-track actions, so anything that can lead them to the identity of suspects or the offenders. And that will include any passive data like CCTV, ANPR, any phone work that can be done. But it will also include speaking to witnesses, the suspects, but also what we call victimology. If you find out how a person lived, you may find out how they died.
Post-mortem results reveal that Iris was shot twice and Mandy 4 times, using a shotgun.
This is a very brutal murder. The way both Iris and Mandy have been gunned down with a shotgun, it's absolutely, it's top scale brutal.
It was vicious in the extreme. Mandy had been shot in the chest and also in the hand, which shattered the mobile phone she was holding to make the 999 call. So that's why it abruptly ended.
Upon realising what was happening, she ran to the phone, dialed 999 and was screaming for help, but the phone was shot out of her hand, and this was confirmed by the pathologist during their post-mortem.
With the emergency call cutting out when Mandy was shot, police confirm the time of death as 7:45 p.m. so can start to piece together Iris and Mandy's last known movements.
The police have been out talking to residents in the area, doing house-to-house inquiries. And of course, they'd also made inquiries with the garage forecourt, where there was a shop, and they spoke to the staff there. Mandy had finished her shift at the care home in Luton where she worked and had arrived home. But first she called at the garage forecourt and went into the shop to buy some items, firelighters, because I think the plan was to have a log fire that evening. So she brought firelighters, she brought some cigarettes, said hello to the staff before going back up to the house.
And inquiries at the garage give police their first breakthrough.
That garage forecourt was subject to CCTV, which was handed over to the police.
The thing with this investigation is we can time the 999 call. So one of the fast-tracked actions would be to review any CCTV in the area around that time. And an obvious one was the garage forecourt, because you had to drive past that or through it to get to Iris's house. When officers reviewed the CCTV, they identified a vehicle that came down the pathway and back out onto the A6 around the time of the murder.
And one sees this people carrier moving in the distance, moving past the garage along the track.
And it was at a time which was about 10 minutes after a 999 call had been made from the house.
And that's what led the police to go to find and identify who was driving the vehicle and so on.
Once we have the registration number of the vehicle, it was flagged on the police national computer to be stopped and checked and reported back to Bedfordshire, because they may be witnesses to the offence, they also may be the offenders. So it's imperative that we find them as soon as possible, because we can put them in the area of the murder at the time it happened.
A day after the murder, and police track down the car in Suffolk. Inside is a couple. But that's not all.
When they searched the vehicle, they found a shotgun in the back. Once the police find a shotgun in the rear of the vehicle, then they were arrested on suspicion of murder straight away, because we've got 2 victims with shotgun wounds. So you've got your suspicion straight away.
The police told us on that Monday they had arrested the couple along with a 14-year-old boy.
Police name the couple arrested as 36-year-old Anita Mansfield and her husband, 46-year-old Michael Milcroft, as well as an unnamed teenager.
Where a shotgun has been used or a firearm has been used, it's vital that we identify everybody who may have been responsible or may have come into contact with the weapon. So in this case, the police forensically examined the 14-year-old boy, and that examination revealed he had gunshot residue on him.
He's showered with gunshot debris. So he was at the scene of the crime, so that's where the police start accusing him being part of the murder.
Once suspects are arrested in a case, that's just the start of the work for the police. There's a huge amount of forensic work that has to be done. We have to carry out searches at their home address or home addresses, and we have to speak to witnesses or people that knew them and dig into their background as well to see if there's any motive that we can identify.
Police start by looking into the backgrounds of Anita Mansfield and Michael Milcroft to see how they could be linked to Mandy and Iris.
Anita Mansfield was someone Michael Milcroft met in the 1980s. He met her in a pub in Dunstable. They quickly formed a relationship.
He then married Anita Mansfield and they had a family together.
We do know that he may have worked as a pot man, helper in a local pub in Leighton Buzzard at one stage, but to all intents and purposes, he was unemployed. He was a carer for Anita. She didn't work. She had health issues to the extent that she told people she couldn't work. A lot of people, a lot of her neighbours thought this was a bit of a sham and that she was using her poor health as a meal ticket, was the way it was described.
She was claiming benefits, but always had delusions of grandeur. She craved a more affluent lifestyle.
Information found at the couple's home at the time of the arrest reveals they were on the verge of moving.
Milcroft and Mansfield had set their hearts on buying a large country house in Suffolk. Really, they wanted to put their lives on a sound financial footing. They'd lived a nomadic life of living a very much a hand-to-mouth existence. They wanted to buy a big house for the family.
They'd found a house to move to, the dream home, which I think was one of the most expensive properties in the area. They wanted to go to that home with its swimming pool and so on.
And so the house near Beccles, that became the house of their dreams. And it was on the market, I think, for £740,000. The purchase should have gone through in the December of 2004. But again, Milcroft and Mansfield weren't ready. They hadn't got the funds. And so a new date was arrived at, which was February 28.
Milcroft and Mansfield were pulling the wool over the seller's eyes in relation to the funding for buying their house.
With the couple living on state benefits and with no savings, police are perplexed as to how they can afford such an expensive new home. But it's not long before officers discover something of interest.
They were renting a property, and searches of that property found documents belonging to Mandy Joseph in the house itself.
The documents are revealed to be life insurance policies taken out by Mandy Joseph 18 months earlier.
She took out two with different companies. One was Norwich Union and one was Zurich Insurance.
Further investigations reveal that in the event of Mandy's death, her beneficiary named in the policies would receive a staggering £800,000. And this beneficiary was named as Anita Oakfield Bennett, also known as Anita Mansfield. Suddenly, police believe they have a motive for murder.
For the insurance companies to pay out, Mandy Joseph had to die.
Police investigating the murders of Mandy Joseph and Iris Jones have arrested a couple, Anita Mansfield and Michael Milcroft, alongside a 14-year-old boy. A search of the couple's home uncovers life insurance documents in the name of Mandy Joseph, which would pay out £800,000 to Anita Mansfield if she died.
Their plan was to get their hands on around £800,000. And unknown to Mandy, Anita Mansfield had taken out life insurance on her life, so that in the event of Mandy's death, the money from two life insurance policies would come to Mansfield and Milcroft.
You can't just go out and take an insurance policy on somebody. There has to be a lot of deception involved, and in this case, they deceived both Mandy and the insurance company.
The couple were extremely cunning all the way through. They built up a picture of Mandy's medical history. They had documents belonging to Mandy they shouldn't have had. They had a mobile phone of Mandy's that was taken from the house. Again, these were all things that could provide them with details of Mandy that would help them in the plan to set up these bogus insurance policies.
Police now believe Anita and Michael fraudulently set up the insurance policies to help fund a new lifestyle.
The plan was to buy this large mansion with the proceeds of that insurance policy.
There were policies apparently taken out on the life of Mandy, and they would have provided the husband and wife defendants with a beautiful home with a swimming pool and all sorts of other good qualities.
To get the money, Mandy Joseph had to die, and that meant they had to kill her.
But the question still remains. How are Anita and Michael connected to their victims, Mandy and Iris?
Michael Milcroft was the foster son of Iris Jones. He had gone to live with Iris and her family in 1959 when he was just 10 days old. And Iris gave a stable home full of love and warmth to lots and lots of children, and Michael Milcroft was one of them. So at the age of 10 days old, he was living with Iris and brought up by Iris and her late husband, and became part of the family.
So for his whole life, Iris was his mother.
I remember Michael, he'd be a bit younger than me. He used to play with us as kids. He was part of our family.
It was said that Michael regarded Mandy as his younger sister. She looked on him as an older brother. They were brought up together as children. They sat round the dinner table, went on holidays together.
At one stage, Michael's girlfriend, Anita, even moved into the home with him. But in 1989, it seems there was a divide in the family.
Iris and Mandy, Michael and Anita had all gone on holiday to Mallorca. There was a big row while on holiday, with the result that When everyone returned, Michael and Anita Mansfield moved out. And that really marked a 12-year gap in things, because he stayed away from Iris and Mandy for all that time and didn't come back into their lives until around 2000. When Michael came back, he changed his name. He was always known as Michael Jones. He'd taken Iris's name. But he was now calling himself Michael Milcroft. And he was married to Anita. They'd started a family. And he was unemployed.
It's believed that this is the point in which the couple devised their devious plan.
For that to happen by a foster brother is just... You wouldn't put that, would you? It's something that is totally unbelievable, to think that money corrupts everything. To kill them both, nightmare. Nightmare.
You know, we kept thinking to ourselves, no, it can't be Michael what's done it.
With news sinking in that Iris's own foster son could be behind her murder, forensic evidence comes in.
We have the forensic evidence, DNA on the triggers of the shotgun, victim's blood on the shotgun, as well as Mansfield's DNA. These are the people responsible for the deaths.
Police present all their evidence against Anita Mansfield, Michael Milcroft and the teenager to the Crown Prosecution Service.
And they decided to charge them with murder.
There were murder counts and also counts of attempting to obtain money by deception.
With the three pleading not guilty to murder, preparation begins to build a case for trial. Starting with trying to prove that the couple had taken out the fraudulent insurance policy.
Anita did much of the setting up over the phone. She would ring an insurance company, pretended to be Mandy Joseph, and proceeded to give Mandy's medical history, saying what she smoked in a week, what alcohol intake, a general medical history, that sort of thing. These were all details that she had somehow gleaned over the last few years in the build-up to the killings, and it helped her in the pretense that she was Mandy Joseph on the phone.
With the policy set up, there was only one thing left to do.
Mandy's death was essential for the claim to be made on insurance. It was erasing certainty that Iris would be in the cottage because at that time she was housebound. So they both had to be killed if they were going to succeed in getting the insurance money.
It's hard to believe that anybody thought they could get away with it. I mean, to us, you've got to be a little bit sick in the head to think that you can get away with something like that to start off with.
With the trial looming, defence barristers are appointed for the three defendants.
I've done many murder trials, either prosecuting or defending. The first I knew about this case was I was instructed in the autumn of 2005, and because the police and the CPS had chosen to charge the boy with being a murderer, he went into custody. So he's remanded in custody, and he goes to a small specialist unit where I visited him.
But there was one piece of information which hadn't yet been revealed about the 14-year-old boy.
He was their son. And I think potentially the most evil part of the case was that the parents thought they could blame their son and get away with it.
In Bedfordshire, Michael Millcroft, Anita Mansfield, and their own son have pleaded not guilty to the murder of Iris Jones and her foster daughter, Mandy Joseph. The trial begins at Luton Crown Court.
The defendants in the case were a mother who complained of ill health, a father who was a rather pathetic sort of individual, and their 14-year-old son who left the premises covered in gunpowder.
What was revealed in court was the lengths that they went to plan this murder.
The court hears exactly what unfolded on that fateful day.
It was just an ordinary day. It was a Sunday afternoon. It was known that Millcroft and Mansfield were coming to the house that evening, and that's one of the reasons that she called into the shop, because the plan was to have a log fire burning for them when they arrived to make it homely and welcoming. And so Mandy had called into the shop to buy firelighters and to help get the fire going. Iris, he was waiting for him in the kitchen, having made a cup of tea and got a log fire roaring.
The first shot would have been delivered to the foster mother. She goes down on the ground in the kitchen. Mandy came into the kitchen, having heard the shot, and received the second barrel. She staggered out of the kitchen, and the son was able to describe to me that his father, having fumbled with the shotgun, reloaded it, went out into the hallway and shot Mandy a second time.
At one point, Mandy Joseph had been on her knees, having received a shotgun blast, but she was still on her knees when she was shot again.
Mandy still wasn't dead, so he fired shotgun into her again a couple of times, and then returned to the kitchen where his foster mother was still breathing. So she heard the killing, and he fired at her, finally killing her, and then left the premises.
In those last seconds of their lives, for Mandy and Iris, it must have been truly terrifying.
In the execution of their crime, the couple went to great lengths to make sure their plan didn't fail.
They even planned to alter the shot in the shotgun cartridge. Normally, a shotgun cartridge will fire small ball bearings and they will spread out into a certain pattern. In this case, they used harder and larger ball bearings, absolutely lethal and illegal to change the shot as well.
The jury also hears how the couple went even further to try to distance themselves from the crime by blaming their son.
Here were two defendants saying that it was the third defendant that did it. They were totally innocent. If there was any dishonesty shown by them when they were first seen by the police, it was because they wanted to protect the boy. That was their story. His story, of course, was that he simply wasn't involved. I think potentially the most evil part of the case was that the parents thought they could blame their son and get away with it. I relied upon the 14-year-old boy, he was then 15 when I represented him, relied on his recollection. He was the only witness to the killing, and his recollection was clear, and it seemed to fit in with other evidence.
The young boy was able to tell the police that he was aware that Millcroft and Mansfield had been planning the deaths of the women for some time, and that various ways of killing them had been discussed and thought about.
They sent the 14-year-old son to the library to research on poisoning.
He did what he was told. He went and looked in the library and read about one or two things and reported back on it.
Researching not just an insurance scam followed by a shooting, but other methods that how Mandy should be killed, including looking into poisoning her, looking into electrocuting her, looking into masonry, heavy masonry falling onto her, or that she would be the victim of a mugging gone wrong.
But it was clear from the evidence that was presented that they've manipulated him as he was growing up.
Anita's defence mirrored that of her husband. Both claimed they heard the firearm discharged, and the father left the vehicle and went in and found this dreadful scene. She claimed to have remained in the vehicle outside the cottage. Her husband went in and then left a few minutes later together with the boy.
The thing I remember most about this investigation was the sheer callousness and brutality of the murder, the callousness to take out life insurance policies because they wanted a house, and the brutality to murder two innocent women so that you can buy that house. It's evil.
After weeks of hearing evidence, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
The 14-year-old boy was found not guilty in this case.
He wasn't wicked, and he wasn't a killer. And that's what the jury must have been satisfied by, at the end of their deliberations, that he had not been proved to be any part of the murder.
Then the jury delivers its verdict against Anita Mansfield and Michael Millcroft.
The evidence in this case was overwhelming. We have the forensic evidence. There's Millcroft's fingerprints on the trigger of the shotgun, as well as Mansfield's DNA. The 14-year-old boy had shotgun residue on his person. We've also got the CCTV from the time of the murder, and we've also got the shotgun found in the back of Millcroft's car. Adding to that, the documentation belonging to Mandy Joseph found at the rented property in Suffolk, as well as all the financial documents which identified fraudulent life insurance policies. So, yeah, pretty damning.
And it appears the jury agreed. Both were found guilty of murder.
Anita Mansfield received a sentence of 30 years, and Michael Millcroft received a sentence of 25 years. Mansfield got the longer sentence because the judge found that she had been the prime mover in what happened. In putting together the plan, she had been the cold, calculated director of operations. Millcroft had very much been a passenger in what happened.
And the reality was that this was a vicious, mean, wicked killing. And I seem to remember an observation by the judge that they had shown no remorse at any time, and that was clearly the case.
The judge said this was, it was no sudden spur-of-the-moment killing.
They never once apologised for what had happened. They showed no remorse.
And the case has left its mark.
When you leave the court afterwards, you never forget the tragedy of the death of the two women.
I think the saddest thing about this crime is how little Millcroft and Mansfield valued the lives of their family.
Why they done it, I know why they done it. They done it for money, but why anyone would think they could get away with it, it's quite unbelievable, really.
I've been a policeman now for nearly 29 years. And I've dealt with some very nasty people, but I've never come across any people quite so evil.
Following the sentencing of Millcroft and Mansfield, Iris's natural son, Brian, revealed how his mum would have been looking forward to her foster son's visit on that fateful day.
First thing she'd do would be at the kitchen sink to make a cup of tea. And that's how she would have greeted them. Hello, love, do you want a cup of tea? And then they shot her.
I mean, Mandy would still be here now, and even today, there's not many days something triggers your mind and you think of Mandy and my Auntie Iris. That's all I can really say.
The death of Iris and Mandy, these were women that had given their lives to helping and caring for other people. Iris especially, she had taken Michael into her arms when he was just 10 days old. Truly, truly shocking and really, really upsetting.
Experience the power of science to crack a crime. Forensics: Catching the Killer is new Friday at 9 on Sky Mix.
Police switchboard.
Hello, I want to report a missing person. She's my children's mum, and when me and the kids woke up in the morning, she wasn't there, but her car's still outside.
She has an accident somewhere or some kind of medical episode, come to some harm where she can't raise the alarm herself.
Half the time they've been found safe and well.
I thought she might have just gone for a nice little weekend away somewhere.
The days went by and we started to realise that something had probably gone wrong.
You just instinctively know that something's wrong, something's not right.
You are under arrest on suspicion of murder of Sarah Welgrave.
In the middle of the Kent countryside lies the quiet residential area of New Ash Green.
New Ash Green was built in the 1960s and 70s as a kind of model village. It's a sort of nice bit of suburbia that's been plonked in the middle of the Kent countryside. Nice place to live, bring up families, there's sports clubs, pretty quiet. There is quite a strong community there. Everyone knows each other and supports each other.
It was the perfect community for popular beautician Sarah Welgreen to set up home with her growing family.
As a daughter, Sarah was everything you could wish for. She was caring, she was incredible fun to be with, brilliant company on it. You know, we used to love going shopping, out for lunch, going on holiday together. She was feisty, she was very caring. And she'd always, she'd always stand up for the underdog. Loved her children without question, always there for them. What else can you say?
I lived in the same house for the entire time I was in secondary school. I've always been close to my mum. If I ever needed anything or needed someone to speak to, she would have always been there for me.
As well as sons Jack and Lewis from a previous relationship, Sarah also had 3 children with Ben Lacombe and dedicated her time to her family.
Sarah worked incredibly hard for her children. She had her day job, but she also had clients in the evening and at weekends, so she had her official clients at work, she had unofficial ones, and everything she did, she did for her children. If you went out shopping for the day, invariably the money would be spent on the children. She always made sure they had good holidays, Halloween, Easter, birthdays, never missed a thing.
My mum, she always used to provide for us. She'd rather go without and see us have everything that she could give us, really. She'd always put us before herself, and it really did make her a good mum. It was great. I was proud of how she was and the woman she was.
The couple's dedication to their children meant that when their relationship broke down, they decided to do what was right for the kids.
They were going to co-parent the children together and just have different rooms in the house and just bring their 3 children up together in a household where they'll have their mum and their dad.
Despite the unconventional setup, it worked for both Sarah and Ben, and both started dating once again, with Sarah meeting Neil on a dating app in 2016.
She'd met Neil, who lived in Farnham. They were quite happy.
I did like Neil, and yeah, from the times I met him, he was a nice bloke. Neil did love my mum.
The couple soon got engaged, and there was more exciting news to come.
In October, she phoned me up. She was really, really happy. She's just got this brand new job, pays more money, she'll be better off, the kids will be better off. She'll be able to help me out more with anything I need. So she was really excited to start it. So everything was looking up for her.
And she was absolutely thrilled to bits with it. She couldn't wait to get started. And that was, like she said, it's in the next phase of my life now.
On 9th of October 2018, just before 8 p.m, Sarah returns home from work still on a high about the new job offer.
She'd come home and she'd been seen arriving, went into the house. She went to bed, texted a boyfriend, sent a few text messages to other people. She told a friend that there's always something to look forward to. You've just got to open your eyes and dream.
The following morning, Sarah's boyfriend Neil texts Sarah, yet he doesn't receive any reply. After a few hours, he calls Sarah's ex, Ben, to ask if he knows where she is. But Ben tells Neil he thought she was with him.
Neil hadn't heard anything and wasn't getting responses back from Sarah, which was unusual. So he had phoned Sarah's parents.
Neil rang me and said, I've been trying to get in touch with Sarah. She's not answering her phone. And I thought, well, Sarah could be a bit scatterbrained. Either her phone would be out of charge or it'd be unplugged or she'd leave it in the car. So I tried to ring her a few times and then I thought, well, when Neil said he couldn't get hold of her, to be honest, I thought maybe she doesn't want to talk to you because it could be a bit intense.
She might have just been ignoring him to begin with, which she could do. So when I tried getting hold of my mum and she wasn't picking up her phone, I'd try through Facebook, texting, phoning some more, just any possible way out to get hold of her. Like tried her other phone, her work phone that she had, but nothing.
The following day, Ben reveals Sarah's still not returned home, and concern for her well-being starts to grow.
Messaged her again and tried WhatsApp, and then I thought, no, this is really, really odd.
I became quite worried because I just wanted to know if she was all right. It's my mum, like, it's the person who's brought me up for my entire life. I just wanted to know that she was okay.
After 48 hours and still no sign of Sarah, Ben decides it's time to call the police.
Kent Police switchboard.
Hello, I want to report a missing person.
Okay.
She hasn't gone missing before. She lives with me. She's my children's mum. She came home Tuesday night and then we all went to bed. And then when me and the kids woke up in the morning, she wasn't there. But her car's still outside.
On Thursday, the 11th of October, Ben Lacombe contacted us to report Sarah had gone missing. He told us that he'd come home from work. He said Sarah had come home just before 8 o'clock and She had gone to her room and she had settled herself into her room, which was on the first floor in their house. They stayed in separate rooms in that house. He told us that after putting the children to bed in the evening, he went to bed himself in the loft converted bedroom. And he said he went to sleep, had a full night's sleep. He'd woken up in the morning and found that Sarah's car was still at the address, but she was missing. After Sarah had been reported missing, officers attended the address and we began a missing person investigation.
Officers turned to Ben for help to piece together Sarah's last known movements, but he said he fully expected to see her the next morning, as it was a special occasion.
He wasn't expecting that Sarah would be gone. In fact, that day was one of their children's birthdays, and they had plans, and he'd expected her to be there.
Officers carry out a routine search of Sarah's bedroom and immediately notice something.
What we did find was that Sarah had left behind not only her car, but her car keys, her house keys, her purse, her cash, her bank cards, her handbag. In fact, everything that anybody could tell us that Sarah had was still at the address. Certainly, it looked like she'd gone out without any planning, leaving everything behind.
Concern was now growing.
There was no way she'd have gone out and left her keys behind.
The minute I'd realised that she'd left her handbag behind, with a purse, car keys, and so many other things that
Bank
Sarah,
cards.
of all the people, would never have gone without any of those things.
For somebody that's gone missing, to have left all of those items behind was really strange and really concerning.
You just instinctively know that something's wrong, something's not right. Something's happened to her.
In the quiet suburban area of New Ash Green, concern is building over mum of 5 Sarah Wellgreen, who has been missing for 2 days. With her life seemingly looking up, a new job and a fiancé, police need to ascertain what would make her disappear. So establish a timeline of Sarah's last known movements on the 9th of October, the day she went missing.
It was a normal day for Sarah. She had taken her children to school that morning. She'd then gone out to meet some of her clients. She was a beauty therapist that used to meet some of her clients at their home addresses, so she went out and saw some of those people. And generally had what her family were telling us was a normal day. Sarah drove home and went into her home address. She'd settled herself into her bedroom. We know that she'd phoned her friend, and then she was settled down for the night.
When she disappeared, the next morning there was contact between various people who knew her. It was agreed that if she didn't return that day or by the next day, that Ben Lacombe would telephone the police.
Kent Police Switchboard.
Hello, I want to report a missing person. She's my children's mum.
Concerned that her disappearance was out of character, police issue a missing person appeal to the public.
Well, I first became involved when we received a press release from the police initially about a missing person from New Ash Green. They said Sarah Wellgreen had gone missing. There were concerns for her welfare. We get so many cases of missing people that you're probably not too worried to start with. Half the time before you've written a story, file copy about a missing person, the police have sent something out saying they've been found safe and well.
But there was something more pressing for the police. Sarah had left her car keys and purse at home, leaving only a couple of scenarios to consider.
We thought maybe she'd gone out for a run and hurt herself.
Has she had an accident somewhere? Has she gone out and had some kind of accident or some kind of medical episode, come to some harm where she can't raise the alarm herself?
With the first few hours of a missing person investigation being critical, police launch a search perimeter around Sarah's home.
They set up a 5-mile radius around New Ash Green for the search effort, scouring woodlands, fields, sheds, wherever anyone could look.
I think they've done all the right searches they could within the area. You know, woodland, scrubland, the mud flaps. They've done all the right checks.
Desperate to reach out to his mum, Lewis turns to social media, and the village community immediately rally round.
Lewis put a call out on Facebook one evening saying his mum was missing and had anybody seen her? And I was thinking, oh, you know, something needs to be done. So I phoned the pavilion. They said, yeah, we can meet people there. We put a shout out on Facebook.
I think the whole village answered the call, really. Everyone turned out.
The response I got from the post on Facebook, it went quite far, very, very quickly. It was shared hundreds of times. It got all over social media so quickly. And then it got put into the papers and everything like that as well, just from one little post like that. There was hundreds of people that went. Most of the village in New Ash Green went, and from the surrounding areas went as well. It did give me hope that I would be able to see my mum again.
The search began with combining the efforts of the police and the community, police leading it, of course.
We have walked and searched every piece of woodland, every field, every bit of grazing land.
There was a sort of lingering hope that she'd be found, you know, maybe she was injured or something, or, you know, something had happened, but she was okay, and that they would come across her. But the longer it went on, it was just no news at all about anything like that.
With no sighting of an injured Sarah within a 5-mile radius, police check her digital footprint for any clues into her whereabouts.
The police looked at her telephone evidence, they looked at billing data, they looked at banking evidence, all various sources of evidence, looking at hospitals to see whether or not there was any trace of her.
There was nothing, no footprint at all digitally of Sarah from that point onwards.
With Sarah seemingly having disappeared without a trace, detectives tried to delve into her life.
We spoke to many people, her family, her friends, and other people in the community, people that Sarah had as clients. We were trying to build up that picture of Sarah. She was a happy person at the time. She had just secured a brand new job offer, which she'd accepted, which came with a fixed salary and a company car.
No doubt whatsoever that Sarah would disappear like that. She was so happy. We'd had a drink on the Friday, she was happy. She was full of life.
With all logical avenues as to Sarah's whereabouts exhausted, police start to suspect something more sinister has happened.
The days went by, and we started to realise that something had probably gone wrong.
My suspicions became raised that something had come to cause Sarah some harm rather than Sarah having just taken herself away. I then was considering, well, who may have caused Sarah harm? Had Sarah gone out and met somebody that was pre-planned, and that person may have then caused Sarah harm? Had Sarah had somebody come to the address and he had taken her away?
But who would have done such a thing? Suddenly, everyone known to her is under scrutiny.
We actually had the police turn up at the house to see if she was there, and it's like, no, we, the ones who've got someone to phone you, she's obviously not here. But obviously they've got to do their job, they've got to come around and check all addresses that she might be at, things like that. So I understand, but turning up to the address where me and my brother are living.
Despite searching multiple addresses of family and friends, there is no sign of Sarah. And when they speak to Ben again, he admits that despite playing happy families, there's more to Sarah than meets the eye.
He went on to say that Sarah's life is a bit strange. It was a bit weird. He said Sarah often would go missing, would often disappear, would go away without telling us, that actually she would go off and meet other people.
Suddenly, police are met with an endless list of suspects. Did Sarah secretly meet someone she knew that evening? Police begin to look closely at anyone Sarah might be romantically involved with, including fiancé Neil, one of the last people Sarah spoke to.
The police came round with a search van on the Friday. They were there for a couple of hours because we sat down and they were asking questions, chatting about lots of different things, lots of possibilities, everything like that.
Neil tells police that he had a brief conversation with Sarah on the night she went missing.
That night I phoned her at 24 minutes past 9. We had a 15-minute conversation and then we exchanged a couple of texts after that, which was normal, and then we said goodnight.
Detectives check his phone records and confirm these calls, but he still needs to prove he was at home in Surrey when he made the calls.
I had my daughter, who at the time was 3, overnight anyway, and so they knew I wouldn't take a 3-year-old all the way over to Kent around the M25. As I said to them, look, if that's any concern, then just check the M25 cameras.
Neil's story is quickly verified, so attention turns to other friends and acquaintances.
We had a lot of people involved in Sarah's life, and we did a significant amount of work to show how they could not have been there that evening. They could not have been with Sarah that evening. And in all of the evidence that we found around Sarah, through her messaging, through her contacts, through her phone, we had nothing to say that Sarah had made any plans that night to go anywhere. There was nothing to say that she'd gone out.
1 week into the investigation, and Sarah remains missing.
You struggle to take it all in to begin with. There's just so many people trying to get hold of you, message you to make sure you're okay. It's hard to explain in a way of how it sort of makes you feel, because you're a mixture between angry, upset, worried, and you just want to know where she is. That's all it is. You just want to know that she's okay.
The desperate search for Sarah intensifies. Police trawl CCTV cameras from neighbouring homes in the village on the day Sarah disappeared.
We captured on CCTV some footage that we were able to see from a neighbour's address. Sarah drove home and she parked her car outside her home around 5 to 8 in the evening on that Tuesday. She then went into her home address.
Police keep watching the CCTV, and suddenly all becomes clear.
And it was from that moment that he became a suspect for potentially harming Sarah.
In the quiet residential village of New Ash Green, the community is desperately waiting for news into the disappearance of Sarah Wellgreen, who vanished from her home the night before her young child's birthday. Ben Lacombe says Sarah returned home from work and both retired to their separate bedrooms. When he woke in the morning, she had gone. But a neighbour's CCTV camera reveals something unusual at 2 a.m. on the night of her disappearance.
The CCTV imagery demonstrated captures of a vehicle which was in all ways similar to the vehicle driven by Ben Lacombe, and it had, because it was a taxi, a distinctive logo on the driver's side of the door. And one of the captures, although it was very grainy in the night, had a blur consistent with that same logo.
With some expert commissioned work around the imagery that we've got and comparing that to the vehicle itself, we had very strong evidence to say that that footage was that vehicle.
Believing the vehicle to be Ben's taxi, detectives trawl CCTV and ANPR cameras in the neighbourhood in an attempt to follow the vehicle's movements.
His taxi had been caught on CCTV cameras going out of New Ash Green and down country lanes, going south and finally at Plaxdale Green Lane, at which point it had kind of disappeared.
And then a little while later on, there were captures of an almost identical vehicle travelling back the other way. And that was key because there was no vehicle that went out and back in that way.
So we now had Ben Lacombe's vehicle on the move between around 2 a.m. in the morning to around 4:30 a.m. in the morning, the night that Sarah had gone missing. So why was Ben Lacombe's vehicle moving for 2.5 hours or so that night when he said he was alone, asleep in his own bedroom all night?
Despite neighbour CCTV capturing his vehicle return at 4:30 a.m, was it really Ben who was driving it the night Sarah vanished? Detectives rewind the footage to see if anyone else entered the property before Sarah arrived home.
Ben Lacombe told us that he'd come home from work. CCTV footage showed that he came home about 5:10 in the evening.
Detectives keep watching, but no one else is seen entering the property before Sarah arrives. But it was the neighbour's CCTV which flagged up another interesting detail.
Ben Lacombe had a sophisticated CCTV system installed at his own address.
From the neighbour's CCTV, we were able to see, going back and viewing 3 months' worth of footage, that the CCTV cameras on Ben Lacombe's house was on almost every single night running up to when Sarah went missing. And we know that because you can see the infrared lights of the cameras through the other footage to see when they're on and when they're switched off. So we know that after midnight, the cameras were switched off on Ben Lacombe's house.
With more and more discrepancies in Ben's account, police start to believe he knows more about Sarah's disappearance than he lets on, and start to piece together his movements.
We are able to show that when Ben Lacombe drove home from work the day that Sarah went missing, he'd passed some cameras and we could see that his car was spotlessly clean. The following morning after Sarah had gone missing, Ben Lacombe took the children to school, passing other CCTV cameras. Now that morning, the car is now dirty. There is mud up both sides of his car and around the tyres and the wheels of his car that wasn't there when we saw him arrive home the day before. Around 10:30 that morning, he went to the office where his cab firm is that he worked for to see one of his colleagues. When we see it arrive outside that office, the car is spotlessly clean again.
It appears that on the night Sarah went missing, Ben Lacombe drove somewhere in his vehicle, resulting in it getting covered in mud. But there's a 2-hour window where the vehicle goes off radar. So where did he drive to? And where is Sarah? Having carried out some good old-fashioned detective work, and despite not having found a body, police make a decision.
So it was on the Monday, doing a formal review of what we had so far, that we moved the investigation from being a missing person investigation into the next day, when it became a homicide investigation.
They said they weren't going to do a television appeal, and I thought, they know something's happened. And Anya, you just know that you're not going to see her again. You know that.
Police believe Ben Lacombe murdered Sarah, but with no cause of death or clear motive, need to work harder than ever to build a case for an arrest. Phone records prove Sarah sent her final text at 10 p.m. Their home CCTV was switched off at midnight, giving Ben a 2-hour window in which police believe he killed Sarah, before putting her in his car and driving off.
The defendant having driven to some kind of deposition site, a grave where he had disposed of Sarah's body.
And then returned along the same route, where he's picked up again on CCTV. There was mud on his car the next day, which he had cleaned off promptly before going to the taxi office.
It was a pre-planned murder that Ben carried out. He killed Sarah. And myself and my team at the Major Crime Department, we instigated plans on that day to have Ben Lacombe arrested on suspicion of the murder of Sarah Welgreen.
Please, can you open the door, please? Morning. Morning. No baggage, please. Just sit up, press your chest, hands on it. Okay. All right, sit up first and when you wake up and I'll explain what's going to happen.
There you go.
The time is 6:45. You are further under arrest on suspicion of murder of Sarah Welgreen. This is a further arrest on the discovery of fresh evidence. This evidence provides inconsistencies with statements provided that you reported the missing. Your arrest is necessary to allow you to be questioned about the offence. Understand? Understand that? Okay, you don't have to say anything in my harm defence. You mention the question later on in court. Anything you do say may be evidence.
When I found out that, he'd actually been arrested for murder, there's a feeling of anger, hurt, hate, all of the things that you'd associate with your partner being killed.
It's just a massive shock to the system. It's just unbelievable what goes through your mind. Now all the questions is where is she? What did he do? How did he do it? Did she suffer? Was it quick? You just don't know the answers to it.
Okay, so you are under arrest today on suspicion of the murder of your ex-partner, and I understand you still live in the same address, that's Sarah Welgreen. Now, as I say, you're here on suspicion of murdering her. We believe she may be dead, and that may be at your hand. So, did you kill her?
The pressure is on to find Sarah's body, establish a cause of death, and prove a motive to enable police to charge their suspect.
It was a vast operation, and one that has involved help from not only officers and staff from across Kent Police, but from across other forces nationally, using experts from the fire service, the marine unit searching water, searching confined spaces. We've searched around 1,400 different areas. We haven't found Sarah.
With searches proving fruitless and the clock ticking, detectives press Ben further.
So, I'm not clear at the moment, Ben, whether you're just trying to think of an answer or whether you've decided not to answer the question.
He remained utterly silent. He did not answer any of our questions. He did not give us any information. He stayed absolutely silent and stared at the floor through 7 hours worth of interviews.
After failing to answer any questions, and despite no body being found, police charge Ben with the murder of Sarah Welgreen. But what really went on that night? And why did their once-loving relationship end in such a tragedy? In a Kent village, the body of mum of 5, Sarah Welgreen, has still not been found, but police pursue a case of murder and have charged 38-year-old taxi driver Ben Lacombe.
It's hard to believe that it's happening to you. I know you see things like that, everything going on in the news and see it all in the newspapers and things like that all the time. You never think it'll hit home, never, until one day it just turns up on your doorstep.
In September 2019, The trial into a no-body murder case begins at Woolwich Crown Court.
When you prosecute a case in which the body of the deceased has not been found, it presents unique challenges in the trial. And those challenges is to demonstrate that the defendant that you're prosecuting is responsible for killing the deceased.
The prosecution reveals to the court a conversation between Ben and police a few days before he was arrested.
We asked Ben Lacombe if we could take information from his mobile phone, and he said to us that actually he wouldn't give us his phone. It was very late. He wanted to go to sleep, and he would give us his phone the next day. As it turned out, and what we later captured on CCTV, was that Ben Lacombe didn't go to bed. He left the address. He travelled around and went into the Dartford and the Greenhithe area and parked up for a few minutes late at night near the River Thames.
There was CCTV footage of the defendant in the pouring rain, desperately trying to get rid of something. And the prosecution suggested that that was the defendant trying to get rid of his own telephone. We knew from other evidence that he had purchased a new telephone in the days that followed Sarah's disappearance. And he was obviously keen to get rid of his own telephone, a telephone which could have given the police an indication of his whereabouts on the night of the 9th of October.
The prosecution reveals further evidence linking Ben to murder.
Although the police didn't know exactly what had happened to Sarah's body, they knew that there had been a period of an hour and a half or so where that vehicle had disappeared. And it seemed likely that as part of the planning, Ben Lacombe had already chosen where it was he was going to dispose of Sarah's body. It may even have been that he had already dug her grave.
When we did a search of Sarah Wellgreen and Ben Lacombe's home, we found a very large shovel in his shed.
The defendant's account of why he needed a shovel of that type at his trial would later become that the shovel was there for his mother to use to tend to the flower beds at the front of his property. Well, on any view, the flower beds at the property didn't require a shovel of that size, and the explanation given just simply wasn't a credible reason for having a shovel of that type. But it was a shovel that was relatively new in its appearance and was consistent with the type of implement that someone would use to dig a grave quickly.
Despite presenting their evidence to court, police still have no obvious motive as to why Ben would kill the mother of his 3 children. But as the trial unfolds, more information about the couple and their relationship comes to light.
Ben Lacombe was born in Greenwich, grew up in Charlton. Early 2000s, he moved to Mallorca, where he was hoping to find work as an airline pilot, or train as an airline pilot.
In December 2004, Ben met Sarah via an online dating site.
In the beginning, when Ben first met my mum, from what I could tell as a child, he was a nice bloke. From what me and Jack had seen, he was all right, he was nice. And everything seemed great, really, to begin with.
Desperate to create a stable home environment and provide her sons with a father figure and a better lifestyle, Sarah quit her job and moved to Mallorca to start over with Ben and their 2 sons.
Obviously, Sarah thought, oh, this is going to be a good life. You know, I really want to give this a try. And it did sound good.
But it became clear to the courtroom that their new life in the sun didn't work out as planned. Unable to speak the language, Sarah couldn't get a job and missed her family and friends back in the UK. Ben's dream to become an airline pilot failed to materialise, and instead he worked a low-paid airport job.
In the end, they moved back to England. By that point, they'd had their first child together, and they moved to New Ash Green.
The couple settled into village life. Sarah got a good job while Ben started working as a taxi driver. But cracks soon started to appear in their relationship.
They muddled along, arguing, bickering, fighting for months after that. And they finally split up. Sarah had made her mind up. She'd had enough.
But if Sarah thought splitting with Ben was going to be easy, she was mistaken. He threw her, Lewis and Jack out on the street, keeping their 3 youngest children inside the house with him.
I was angry with Ben, but that had been built up through a few months of just listening to the arguments and things like that, and then that just throwing us all out, it was just unfair on us, really. We had nowhere else to go.
The next morning, Ben already had a court hearing arranged, and he stated in court that Sarah abandoned her children. Could he have custody? And he was awarded custody. It was all pre-planned, and Sarah could not defend herself because she did not know what was happening.
Distraught that she no longer had access to her youngest 3 children, Sarah and her 2 eldest sons moved in with her mum and stepdad.
We were absolutely devastated. You see your child crying and you can't help them. And we literally scraped up everything we had to go and see a solicitor.
But things took a positive turn for Sarah in August 2016, when she was awarded full custody of the children. Not only that, she met boyfriend Neil. Despite this, Sarah was terrified that Ben would attempt to take the children away from her if she moved in with Neil. So she made an unlikely peace offering with Ben to raise their 3 children under the same roof.
Sarah wasn't happy about living with Ben. There was definitely animosity between the 2 of them. You know, they'd been together for a number of years. That didn't work out for various different reasons.
Yet Sarah had a plan: to buy Ben out of their 4-bedroom family home. And she soon secured a new job with a big enough pay rise to make this happen. And after arriving home from work on 9th October 2018, she tells Ben her plan.
Ultimately, Ben had lost control. The house was going to be put up for sale. He was going to lose his home, even though he was going to get half the equity.
And he'd lost not just, the property which he loved so much, but he'd lost control of the children.
When you look at Ben Lacombe, he would have been left with almost nothing.
Because he would have found himself in a position that Sarah was in not long before. And I think that probably pressured him into doing something stupid.
Ben was the only one that would have a motive for killing Sarah. Nobody else. Ben had everything to gain from getting Sarah out of the picture permanently.
After a grueling 30-day trial at Woolwich Crown Court, the jury returns its verdict. Ben is found guilty of Sarah Welgreen's murder. He is sentenced to 27 years in prison.
"27 years for Ben Lacombe is not enough. Ben Lacombe should never see the light of day until he admits to those 5 children where he's put their mother. I've got one child who came home crying the other day because they wanted their mummy to pick them up from school one last time. So no, not enough.
The case of Sarah Welgreen is among a small number of convicted murder cases in the UK in which the victim's body has never been found. But the community has never given up hope of finding her.
We give the family hope that one day they will be able to find her, otherwise they've not got that hope to hold on to.
And that they know that we're still looking, and they know that we won't stop looking, do they?
Not been forgotten.
No, that's all.
We would like closure. All of us would like closure. For the body to be disclosed, to have a proper funeral, will probably help us all put it to bed.
2 years on from her disappearance, Sarah's family are slowly coming to terms with life without her.
Ben's actions have caused me to lose my mum, for some of my siblings to lose their mother and their father at the exact same time. And it's an unthinkable thing. It really is. You never expect anything like this to ever happen to you, and you wouldn't wish it on the worst person. It's just a horrible, sunken feeling and just a hole in your heart that you'll never fill.
It is very raw. There's not a day goes by when you don't think about her, whether it's something that's played on the radio, or you see something, oh, Sarah would like that, or something the children say. Yeah, there is never a day goes by, and I don't think that will ever change for any of us.
And until she is found, the question remains, where is Sarah Wellgreen?
Investigate an infamous case stage by stage to appreciate the full picture in OJ Made in America, available now on Sky Documentaries.
The house was dark except for the light in the kitchen. It was early evening. The house shouldn't have looked so lifeless. I parked and slowly got out of the car. Dropping my briefcase by the front door, I walked into the dining room. My wife was sitting at the table with a full wine glass, the bottle nearby, half drunk. This morning we hadn't opened the bottle. Besides the bottle, there were a few papers on the table. I hadn't seen what they were yet. This is it, I thought, turning on the voice recorder app on my ubiquitous phone, grateful that we were living in a state of complete agreement. "How long have you known?" she asked. She didn't look at me. "Long enough," I said. "I must stop to explain to you. When I got home, I wasn't expecting this conversation, but I deal with cliches every day, so it was easy to see where this was going. I'm a freelance writer. I write travel articles, humor, opinion, and promotional texts. Anything, really. I also ghostwrite of sorts and edit the work of others. On the side, though, and just for fun, I write erotic fiction for a leading website. I've written several hundred short stories under various pseudonyms so that the fetish doesn't show. I've even read more short stories than I've written, so I understand all the tropes. I've written dozens myself, often involving a cheating spouse and an unexpected revelation. But the great thing about cliches is that they're often true. I suppose all people are the same. It takes DNA tests to tell them apart. But like I said, when a guy comes home and finds his wife of 10 years sitting alone in a darkened house, illuminated only by the faint light of the kitchen stove, halfway through a bottle of wine, there are only a few options as to where this conversation will go. For one, she wasn't going to tell me we won the Powerball lottery. Sure, the heat pump could have exploded or the basement could have flooded, both of which happened a few years ago. But that kind of news never caused a gloomy drunkenness. No, this was a marriage breakup scenario come to fruition. I knew this with certainty within the first 2 seconds of seeing the grim picture of the scene. She didn't have a scheduled doctor's appointment either, so I ruled out health problems. An accident with a relative would have resulted in phone calls. It was something else, and that something else had to be infidelity. It was still frustrating and surprising. "I never meant to hurt you," she said. Of course. I sat down across from her. "You know from church that forgiveness is impossible without full confession," I said, using her Catholicism, admittedly usually careless but now much more obvious, as a weapon. "And if I have to fight you for the truth, you can just back off," I told her much more bluntly than usual. "You've done enough as it is." She flinched, and her shoulders slumped. "I've only slept with him twice." "With who? Give me his name, for crying out loud. Full confession, remember?" "I only slept with Jack twice when we traveled for work a couple months ago." She refused to look at me, but her confession narrowed it down. We knew a lot of Jacks. She'd worked with several, though. All of them were married, so I took a chance. I talked to his wife. "You talked to Miriam?" she said in awe. Bingo. Now I knew which Jack was which. No, I lied. There was confusion on her face. What? I lied. Do you like it? I don't understand. It's just that, until now, I had no idea you were cheating on me. Now I know, though. And I know with whom. Not only that, I'm going to tell that asshole's wife. But these, she said tearfully, pointing to the papers lying on the table. I saw them now. She had found them on my desk. They explained how to file for divorce in our state. They served as a backdrop for the wife slut story about dissolving a sham marriage. My previous articles had focused on violent retaliation against an asshole, not the technicalities of divorce. My wife's guilt forced her to take a few logical steps. Those? I asked, standing up and heading for the door, ready to leave for good. Just a sad coincidence, she cried harder.